The Rune Smith. Chapter 91 Registration and Ranking Up. Welcome back Mr. Wayland, we are finished here as well. The busty elf lady smiled at Roland as he returned with the puppy. He had taken it down from his head by now. This was done out of concern that the puppy would grow up thinking that he might be the leader of the pack. He couldn't just let his tamed monster literally walk over him. Bernier was to the side waving at him as well. He looked happy for some reason after looking at the puppy that was now in Roland's hands. Welcome back Mr. Wayland, did you decide on the name? Not really. The old man that explained how taming creatures like these had informed him about this. The monster contract wouldn't be fully complete unless he named the monster. This was done through the system window and he just needed to concentrate while looking at the wolf pup's status. How about I just call it Potato? The wolf pup gave out a menacing whine the moment he mentioned the name. It clearly didn't like Roland's naming sense, but he had no idea how to call the red creature. It looked quite cute at the moment, but when it grew up it would look closer to a wolf. Little Potato? That would be a cute name for such a little cutie. The elven woman looked down at the barking dog while chuckling. Sure, so everything has been cleared up? Then can I get my adventurer card updated? He asked as he had signed all the papers relating to the new party member. The ruby wolf puppy would become his tamed monster. His adventurer card was taken to perform some updates. It was interesting how these cards worked. They would add certain symbols onto it which would then inform people about certain things. A little picture of a beast would be added in the corner which would indicate that he was an owner of a beast. This card could then be given to any guild and they could scan it for the detailed information about the monster in question. This all was not done with any runic components though, as he couldn't identify any of them. It worked on some other magical system. It was probably done through regular enchanting which used a slightly different language or maybe something else entirely that he wasn't aware of. Runes were not the end-all be-all in this world. Many other magic languages existed that could produce similar or even better effects. The old gnome also told him to get a collar for the wolf pup. It would then signal other people that this monster was owned by someone and keep them from attacking it. The papers that explained things about his creature were also given to him by the old man. He could present them to the guards the next time he saw them, which would be proof enough to not pay any more tolls. This could also be done by showing his adventurer card, but it wouldn't always be accepted outside the guild. If the monster went through an evolution, he would need to return to the Adventurers Guild to have everything updated. The creature would be judged again. Sometimes monsters got extremely violent, which in some situations caused them to be banned from entering cities. Other times they would change into a poisonous or corrosive variant that by just being in contact with others could cause them harm. Yes, Mr. Bernier had explained everything. Are you willing to sell the damaged golem core? Even if it's damaged, the materials can still be used by some craftsmen. Roland had dumped a lot of money into buying resources for his deep steel armor, but he wasn't that strapped for cash. He could always enchant some disposable weapons on the side to earn more. The golem's core, on the other hand, was a rare commodity that could be melted down and turned into an alloy. If done correctly, this alloy could boost the regular metal's capabilities. I'll keep it for now. When can I get my card back? It shouldn't take more than 30 minutes, Mr. Wayland. Why don't you sit down and have a drink while you wait? The elven woman pointed to the side where a small section of tables was it. The guild did have a dining section. They mostly served beer and some easily made dishes for the adventurers that were stuck waiting like him. He just nodded and turned around. His little dog continued to bark in his hands as he carried it around. Calm down or I'll really give you the name Potato, or how about Beetroot? You're quite red like one. The pooch instantly went quiet after Roland continued to mention vegetable names. It was clear that this wolf-to-be didn't want to be named like this. It felt like a drag to come up with a fitting one. While going towards one of the tables to sit at, he tried remembering some popular dog names that were used in his old world. Max. Charlie. Boomer. Woofer? Crimson Fang. There were just too many to choose from for him to decide on such a short notice. He could go with a regular name similar to a person or try something more interesting or cool. This puppy would evolve into a more ferocious-looking ruby wolf or maybe even something else entirely. The interesting part about tamed monster evolution was that their master could affect the evolution in one way or another. He had this explained by the old man during the paper signing. Depending on what he fed the wolf, it could even change its elemental affinity in the next evolution. A tamed monster like this didn't go through any class changes and trials like people did. It was more or less automatic for any regular wild beast. It was slightly different for the monsters that were taken out from dungeons as he did. Apparently, after reaching the first threshold of the 25th level, he would be actually able to decide between some evolution options. It was even possible for him to keep the monster unevolved and wait for it to gain more skills and achievements in hopes of earning a rare class. It was very much a game-like system, which made it more interesting. While thinking about the future, he finally sat down at the table. He didn't eat breakfast due to the unforeseen monster birth, so he was a bit hungry. This place's food wasn't the best though, but it would get a person through the day. There were also more people that looked quite hungry with him. Bernier followed him here, and he could even hear the man's stomach giving out strange noises. "You hungry?" "Hey? Oh no, I'm fine." It was clear that the half-dwarf had gone through a traumatic experience and probably famished. Roland was somewhat aware of his situation, which probably caused him to not have much money. While Bernier was out cold, he had gone through his backpack and there was actually almost no gold in it. The prices in the guild were higher when food was concerned, so he assumed that saving money was probably Bernier's agenda. "Is that so?" Soon a young cat lady showed up to take their order. "What will it be?" she called out in a quite energetic voice while mostly focusing on the red puppy that was squirming around. Roland had forced it into his armpit so that it wouldn't cause trouble. "Bring us some kielbasa with bread and butter. Make it enough for 3 people. Then give me 2 glasses and a bowl with water." "Coming right up, mister." The waitress nodded at the order and then promptly walked away into the back room. There she would bring it to the cook while getting the glasses for water faster. "For 3 people?" Bernier asked from the side while swallowing some of his saliva. Roland didn't answer as he waited for the waitress to return with the glasses. The bowl was placed on the table by him along with the small pup that started to quickly drink from it. His long tongue worked fast, causing some of it to drench the table. This was something that he had to contend with, as he was afraid that if he placed the dog on the ground it would run off somewhere. Then he would be stuck chasing after it. If it did any damage to the city or anyone in it, he would be responsible for it. "I need to train this dog to behave." While thinking about his future taming headache, he offered 1 glass of water to Bernier. He himself slowly looked at his own glass before giving out a sigh to move his visor up. "Mr. Wayland." "It's fine." Bernier was a bit surprised by Roland exposing his face to the Adventurers Guild. From the previous talk that they had, he made it seem that he didn't want to reveal that he was a runesmith to others. Roland, on the other hand, was tired of constantly running back and forth from the city to his house with and without the armor. It had been over a year since the encounter with the cultists, and his family hadn't found him in 6 years. It was safe to assume that no one knew where he was or cared if he was alive. His face had changed with the years, long gone were his childish features. Now his face was more adult-like, and with every day his physique was getting bulkier due to all the fighting and smithing. Even his brothers might not have been able to recognize him if they met him out on the street. He had thought about it hard for the past year and arrived at the conclusion that he might be sticking out more by hiding his face constantly. If he actually wanted to live in this city, he would need to take part in it. That would require him to work with other people and depend on others in one way or another. With that, he gulped down on the water, but when the waitress walked back, he quickly moved his visor down so that she wouldn't see his face. The sausages were brought over and she left after giving the 2 a nod. "Well, I don't need to reveal everything today." Bernier looked at him a bit taken aback by how quick he hid his face from the guild worker. He was too busy devouring the kielbasa sausages to take it to heart though. The little wolf pup received his share of food as well. The little guy's ruby-tipped tail started smacking into the wooden table as he ate up. Roland himself only ate half of his portion while mostly inserting it into his mouth with a half-closed helmet. It was still hard for Roland to let go of old habits. It would be a slow process to relearn how normal people operated, but he hoped that he could let go of his fears in the coming future. The half-dwarf looked quite happy after eating the meal. The puppy on the other hand started going into snooze mode. It just plopped down between Roland's legs and started sleeping after devouring quite a sizable sausage. After some uncomfortable silence washed over the two young men, Bernier was the one to speak up first. Roland was a person of few words, never really speaking out without a purpose behind it. His new friend on the other hand wasn't that reserved. "How long have you been here for, Mr. Wayland?" "For about a year." "Oh, did you make that armor yourself or did you buy it somewhere? Did you decide on a name for that little pup? Will you be going to the dungeon again? Do you need help carrying things?" "I'm pretty good at disassembling the monsters, my skills are quite high." What followed was a series of questions to which Roland replied in either a nod or a quick sentence. Luckily the receptionist from the Adventurer Guild waved him over as he peeked to the side. After getting an earful from Bernier, he wanted to run up and kiss her from saving him. "Ah, is your card ready?" Bernier asked while Roland stood up. The half-dwarf looked a bit saddened at the quick end of their conversation. He was still worried about his future prospects. Working for Roland as an assistant was something he was aiming for. All the smithies were taken over by dwarves that liked to stick to old customs that wouldn't let any outsiders in. Only after many years of doing side work would they ever consider him as a valid apprentice. There were many people looking for work, so there wasn't really anything holding them back from keeping their traditions running. Roland was made aware of the half-dwarf's predicament during their walk here. This did explain why such a promising craftsman was carrying gear for adventurers instead of working in his own field. It does seem like it is. He left towards the lady elf who returned his adventurer card for him. He could clearly see that he had the little symbol for the tame beast included in it, but there was also a little bonus. Silver rank. The card had switched from the steel grade to silver grade as well. It looked that defeating the floor boss was enough to prove himself. "Yes, congratulations, Mr. Wayland. The Ruby Golem's core was enough. I hope you will continue to do business with our Adventurers Guild. Would you like me to list all the benefits of being promoted to the silver rank? Or would you like to take the pamphlet instead?" Roland looked over his card. It had a distinctive silver hue to it. He wasn't that informed about jewelry, but silver, platinum, and mithril rank cards looked a bit similar to each other. The silver one was a bit darker than the other two, with the mithril one being the brightest. "I'll just take the pamphlet. That will be 3 large copper coins." Roland's eyes narrowed when asked to pay for this pamphlet, but he also didn't really want to stay here and have this woman explain everything. He had already been here too long due to his tamed beast. "Here. Thank you for your support. Remember to look at the notice board, you'll find all the silver rank listings there." "Right, thank you." After saying his goodbyes, he turned around to leave. With the puppy in his hand, it was time to go home and figure some things out. There was no reason to look at the notice board, as even without taking specific missions he could just hunt tier 2 monsters and sell items to the guild. Sometimes there would be specific listings that offered more money for some body parts. Those were mostly placed there by people like alchemists that needed them for potion brewing. Depending on the recipe, some monster parts sold better than others. Sometimes other adventurers placed offers for new members or for temporary help. He reached out with his hand to the Adventurers Guild door and pushed it open. Before leaving, he turned around as Bernier had stopped in his tracks. Normally this would be the moment that these two would part their ways. Roland had delivered the information and also received his card upgrade, but after thinking some things through he had come to a decision. "For now I can offer you free lodging and food. If you prove yourself, we can talk about a set wage. But you'll have to show me how you work with a hammer first." Roland called out to Bernier from afar. The red-haired youth's gloomy expression quickly changed as he moved forward. Thank you, I won't let you down. You'll be sleeping in that log cabin though, now let's go, there is still some work left to do. The two young men soon left afterward. The day was still young and Roland had some tasks for his new apprentice. He would need him to prove himself before being allowed to be part of his workshop. Then a proper employment contract would need to be produced, a similar one to what he had signed back in Edelgard. Woof. Quiet down, tomato. Chapter 92, Giving a Name. Roland and Bernier were in the process of returning to the workshop. After getting breakfast out of the way, both of them were ready to work on some things. The crimson armor that he wore needed some tending and his shield did take the brunt of that attack. Before any repairs could be made, he would need to clear up some things with his new worker and also his new tamed beast. The little puppy had woken up halfway through their trip and was now running circles around Roland. From what the old man said at the Adventurers Guild, he knew that the wolf pup needed to be named. Unless this final bit wasn't complete, the little dog wouldn't fully listen to him. How about you name him Red, Mr. Wayland? Or maybe Ruby? Bernier had been giving him some naming advice along the way, but Roland wasn't feeling any of them. He looked at the fuzzy ball of energy that was jumping around. It even chased after some adventurers that they ran in during their return, which left him to apologize. He was found in a fire dungeon. After mumbling to himself, he moved over to where the dog was. The little guy looked up to him and gave out a loud bark. Roland leaned down to pick him up. The little guy's tongue was out and he was panting out loud. How about Agni? With his love for old mythology, he came to the conclusion that he could go with one of the fire gods from his old world. Agni was the name of the ancient Hindu fire god, which would fit the theme of the fire dungeon that he got this puppy from. After looking through the wolf's status screen, he did possess a high affinity for fire. Oh! Bernier called out from the side as after Roland mentioned the name something started happening. A strange magic symbol appeared in front of the puppy that was somewhat similar to a rune but not quite it. This magic symbol slowly floated towards the small wolf's forehead and entered it. Following this, the small monster's body started glowing for a second before returning to normal. Was that a tamer contract? Didn't think I'll ever see one so close up. Bernier chimed in while watching the strange phenomenon. Roland also noticed that he gained a title the moment the process was finalized. Tamed Beast I. You have made a lifelong contract with at least one beast-type monster. It looked more like an achievement than a contract, but he knew that even this could unlock special classes. He wouldn't be surprised if he would be able to pick one of the tamer-related classes in the future. There was also a change to his new friend's status that appeared after this strange phenomenon. Name: Ruby Hound Puppy L1X 0% bonded. Bonded. I guess we have a connection now. I wonder. He placed the wolf down on the ground, but this time around he started out with his name. Agni, sit. The little puppy perked up at the command and after barking sat down on his behind. His tail continued to swing around while kicking up some dirt in the process. Both he and Bernier were quite surprised at how the puppy was behaving now. It seemed that by having the contract the monster would start to follow its master's instructions. Roland also remembered what the man at the guild told him. If the master outlevels a young monster like this, there are never any issues with the commands. Even less if the master is a tier above. Only when the monster starts to outlevel its owner would it show defiance. He was reminded by the old man to be careful. Allowing the monster to fight for a person without the master doing anything would cause it to advance quickly. Many tamers sometimes got lazy and stagnated with their monsters overtaking them. The experience between a tamed monster and its master would be divided between the two. This wasn't at 50% as some might think. It was closer to 70% for the monster and 30% for its owner. In some cases, if the monster was a violent variant, it could go berserk and even kill its own master. Such stray monsters would then roam the land unhinged from their contract. Having a monster go berserk could be counteracted by a couple of things. Besides the owner having a higher level, some tamer and summoner-like classes could have special traits or skills that kept their beasts at bay. Another way would be through magical items similar to slave collars that would force a monster to obey. Well, I can always keep it from advancing if it ever reaches my level. This was the most common way of guarding oneself against an unruly tamed beast. In Roland's case, he was an active fighter and he also gained experience from crafting items. It was highly unlikely to him that his tamed monster would ever reach a higher level than he did. It's finally listening to you, Mr. Wayland. Good, let's go. It was time to return to his home. With his new wolf partner now somewhat behaving, he could give Bernier some work. After arriving, they headed over to his side workshop where he kept the regular iron and steel tools. You can stay in this shed for now. You can also use the spare wood if you want to customize it. I can make changes. Sure, you do have that carpenter class, it would be a waste to not use it. Just tell me before you make any changes. The two started talking and Roland began listing some rules for his new worker. For one thing, he wasn't allowed to wander around the premises. There were many buried traps here and there that could be set off by the clumsy half-dwarf. He had already been shocked by his door, so he didn't want him to get his foot blown off on a mine. Mine runes. Bernier took a bit to look around. The backyard was a bit unkempt and weeds along with grass were making it hard to spot where these mines could be buried. Yes, I'll probably have to remove those, for now just don't go behind the house. Roland glanced at the puppy that he was holding. The little guy was wiggling around and trying to escape, but he knew that it could cause an explosion to occur. Maybe later he could teach this wolf to evade the traps by smell, but for now, they were a big hazard for both Agni and Bernier. Okay, Mr. Wayland. Roland wanted to remind Bernier about dropping the honorifics, but then he remembered. He was actually about double the age of this young man, so acting as his master wouldn't be that out of the ordinary. Well, I'll be in my house if you need something. Bernier nodded as Roland left him to his own devices. The straw mattress and the blanket were in the log shed already, so he only needed to get the half-dwarf a pillow. The log shed was quite large. There was also room behind it to expand it in scope. He was hoping that Bernier, that had the carpenter class, would be able to expand it himself without his help. I wonder if he could help me build that wind turbine later. After his makeshift steam engine had been set up, he started thinking on ways of improving it. There were other ways of generating power that didn't even require mana in the first place. One of these were wind turbines. There was enough space to make one of them in the back. There was no reason to make a full-sized one. He wasn't interested in grinding down grains to make flour. He was mostly interested in generating electricity which he could connect to his generator. With some wind runes as backup to make it spin when there was no wind, it could work better than his previous setup. Roland closed the door after himself and placed Agni on the floor. The little animal instantly took off towards one of the rooms. He gave out a sigh but let the wolf look around the house while he decided to go to his workshop. After going downstairs and removing his armor, he gave out another sigh. A lot had happened in just one day and he suddenly found himself, 2 roommates. He wasn't sure what to do with the two, but he had some plans. First, he remembered his times in Edelgard. This had taught him the power of magical contracts. These contracts could actually be made by him thanks to his scribing profession. Depending on the tier of the person signing it, a higher level scribe would be required. His new Runesmith Lord class allowed him to use tier 2 scribing skills as well, thus there wouldn't be a problem with that. He still had his old contract stashed away so he could copy most of it over while making some changes. I feel that Bernie will sign anything that I put in here, he seems desperate. It was clear from how the half-dwarf acted that he wanted this job offer badly. His eyes shined brightly whenever he looked at his blacksmithing tools. Even though they were unkept and rusty, it didn't matter to that guy. Bernier was also close to reaching the 50th level, which would bring him into the tier 2 rank soon. He would then be gaining a tier 2 smith as help around the house. Previously Roland never considered getting more help, thinking that he could somehow manage everything solo. Now on the other hand, he started seeing some potential in sharing the workload. It was unknown to him what path Bernier would follow, but he hoped he would pick the armorsmith class first. With the added help he would be able to focus on things that he was good at, which was rune crafting. He would be able to leave all the time-consuming armor repairs to his new worker while he focused on discovering new runic patterns and code combinations. This would further his progress exponentially. First, I need to get that contract done. Can't have him talking about my runic forge nor my steam engine. It would be good to have him work with the runic tools, but will the contract be enough to keep his mouth shut? The trust issues that he had run deep, but with the contract signed he would more or less feel secured. He didn't think that Bernier would speak out on his secrets unless threatened with his life. Expecting someone to take his secrets with him to the grave was asking a bit much. These contracts activated after they were broken, so even if he put some kind of silencing curse on it, it would only activate after the information was given. The purpose was to not have the person signing the contract perform certain acts but couldn't stop the process from happening. There of course were some contracts that were more strenuous, but they required the involvement of the darker kind of magic. Slave collars and magic items could also perform this task, but something like that felt somewhat wrong to him. Bork. A bark of a wolf moved his attention to his other problem. The dog here was still newborn, and at this current level, he wasn't really useful. Agni, do you want to go kill some monsters? The dog started wiggling his rump behind frantically and jumping around the house as if he couldn't contain his happiness. First I need to get that contract done. Your training will have to wait. Roland went to grab some scrolls. It was time to scribble down the first draft of Bernier's contract. He needed to make it sure that his new worker would not babble out some of his secrets. The contract would be ready for when his new friend actually proved his worth. If his skills were not up to par, or if he showed no willingness to improve, then Roland would need to take back his offer. From how eager his new friend acted, it didn't seem that he suffered from a lack of motivation. I'll get him to smith something later, like a ladle. He smirked to himself a bit after remembering his blacksmith class change. Soon he walked away to get some work done, his little red puppy following him around while being a constant bundle of energy. A few days later. Are you sure we have everything? Yes, Mr. Wayland, I double-checked everything. Good, just remain in the back to be safe, but we won't be going to the lower levels, so it should be fine. Bernier nodded at Roland's words while both of them headed towards the dungeon. It was early morning as the two young men set off. In front of the two-man team was a rather energetic little wolf pup that took the chance to bark at any adventurers that he met. Agni, come back. You might get attacked like last time. Roland called out to the pup that quickly sprinted back to him. He picked him up from the ground and placed him on his shoulder. Previously, some newbie adventurers tried attacking his little tamed monster. It caused a little scuffle to unfold, but due to his fame rising, they backed away after seeing his shiny crimson armor. Soon the small party arrived at the entrance of the dungeon. Some people had seen Roland's performance against Armand, so they backed away as he was going through. Bernier had a strange smirk on his face while seeing this. Mr. Wayland, you sure are popular with the other adventurers. Is that so? Roland tried to ignore that fact as well as Bernier's ass-kissing attempt. You still need to make that shield when we get back. TCH. He could hear his new associate giving out a strange sound. After signing a contract, he was given tasks around the smithy that took out a good chunk of his time. He was a good worker but also had some bad habits that other dwarves had. For one thing, he liked to drink a lot. With the lodging fees taken care of, he used some of the coins he had over to get some cheap alcohol. This he also drank during work. When asked for an explanation, he only replied that he worked faster when under the influence. This was a fact that he discovered after the contract was signed. If he knew, he would have included a non-drinking during work clause. The two descended into the first floor and went through one of the corridors. Most adventurers had progressed enough so this level wasn't being used. Today was the day to help his puppy to level up. For that he needed to have him kill other monsters. Normally when a person at the second tier was in a party with tier 1 people, they wouldn't get much or any experience. Luckily for him, the tamed monster contract was a bit different and a small part of experience would fall to his monster. The fastest way was still to have him fight himself, as no skills would be leveled up. With low skill numbers, the evolution options would be very limited. There we go, Agni, get ready. The puppy gave out a loud bark while looking forward. There stood his enemy, and it was a menacing one indeed. Red rat L2. Roland pointed at the small creature. It was larger than a regular rat, and the red coloring showed that it was somewhat resistant to fire. This monster was slightly smaller than the ruby wolf, but they were close. Bite it to death, Agni. The command was given, and the ferocious wolf puppy charged forward. The red rat could see the other monster coming at it and reacted by charging straight at his enemy. The two clashed with each other and started rolling around on the ground. Roland looked on with surprise as the battle continued for quite a while. Both monsters started biting each other, scratching and gnashing their teeth in rage. In time the victor was decided. The red rat was victorious, and a defeated Agni escaped behind Roland's leg. The rat continued its chase but was grabbed by Roland with one hand. Bernie. Yes, Mr. Wayland. Are there any weaker monsters in here than rats? I don't think so, Mr. Wayland. I thought so. Some might think that a slime would have been the easiest foe to defeat. But for a monster without weapons, biting something like a heated slime would be quite painful. If Agni's fire resistance was high enough to counter the boiling hot slime liquids still remained to be seen. A crunching sound could be heard as Roland squeezed the rat to death with one hand and just tossed the dead body to the ground. Agni peeked out from between his legs and quickly charged forward at the dead monster that he lost to. He sniffed it a few times before howling out loud. His face was then raised high as if he himself defeated this troubling foe. This is going to take a while. Roland gave out a sigh and continued towards the dungeon. Maybe with some luck, he would find a level 1. Chapter 93. Going further below. Go for the neck. Roland shouted while trying to cheer. Both he and Bernier were a bit to the side while two monsters were battling. One of them looked like a red-colored salamander while the other one was a ferocious wolf puppy. The reptilian monster was a bit bigger than the puppy, but the wolf didn't seem to care. It danced around its foe while biting into its flesh. The moment the salamander tried to retaliate, the small wolf was gone and to the other side. With time these small nibbles added up and the final blow was delivered. Agni jumped on top of the half-dead salamander and pressed its fangs into his opponent's neck. The moment the teeth sunk into its flesh, a surge of flame was injected into it. The ruby wolf activated its special skill to deliver the final blow. The opponent went down, dead and unmoving. Woof! Great job, he really is improving really fast, boss. Bernier called out while moving over to the dead monster. That he is. There is a small mana stone close to the lungs. Roland also moved closer. His little monster had been training up his skills. It had been about a month since they all ventured inside of this dungeon now. At first, Agni was barely able to contend with a L1 rat, but after he started leveling the progress picked up. The little guy was quite smart and his forte was speed and agility. With the increase of his stats, he started to get smarter. With this intelligence also came wisdom, as Agni was able to learn from all of his fights. Sometimes he won, sometimes he lost, and Roland had to assist him. Now he was able to safely combat monsters at his own level and even ones a few levels above. Good boy. Roland leaned down to give his puppy a pat on the head. He was on the fence about this whole predicament, but now he was glad that the egg hatched. The puppy wasn't hard to bring up as it only required food and shelter. After 2 weeks he also stopped peeing in the house and now even had his own dog hose outside. Though that didn't keep him from trying to sleep inside. You are improving at a high pace, luckily we can somewhat share our experience. Roland glanced at his own and Agni's status screens. Name: Roland Arden L77. Classes: T2 Runesmith Lord L2 Primary, T1 Mage L25 Secondary, T1 Runic Mana Scribe L25X, T1 Runic Blacksmith L25 Tertiary. HP: 2478/2478. MP: 7354/7354. SP: 3366/3366. Strength 66, Agility 46, Dexterity 94, Vitality 66, Endurance 75, Intelligence 125, Willpower 114, Charisma 17, Luck 10. Name: Ruby Wolf Puppy L10X 67%. Type: Fire/Earth/Beast. HP: 129/129. MP: 148/148. SP: 220/220. Strength: 10. Agility: 20. Dexterity: 10. Vitality: 9. Endurance: 13. Intelligence: 10. Willpower: 12. Charisma: 16. Luck: 14. Both the little beast and master had leveled up during this month. Roland only gained 1 level, but he noticed that he was gaining about twice the amount of stat points that he previously did. This with his Lord class perk made his 1 level at tier 2 count for 4 levels at tier 1. With this, he felt like he could finally become stronger. The wolf pup was leveling up faster than his owner. This was because there was some experience shared between monster and master. When Roland defeated high-level foes, a small part of the experience was given to his wolf. Agni did have to be close to him for that to go through. If the distance was more than 20 meters, nothing would happen. He would also gain a bit more the closer he was during combat. This was something that he had tested out at his old training spot with the troglodytes. He used his bombing method this time around and found his little puppy gaining a big chunk of experience. Those monsters were quite a low level for someone like him, so he wasn't receiving much, but with the help of his new assistant, he would at least be gaining the money back for his runic bombs. This day they have come here to descend into the lower levels. Roland had given Agni some time to level up, but he himself had remained stagnant. After defeating the ruby golem, he had almost gained a level already. Now after a month his experience points haven't increased by much and his skills were also not growing. For this day he had prepared to go down below the 10th level to the fabled lava area of this dungeon. That area was still getting mapped out as it was swarming with tier 2 creatures. No tier 3 monsters had been spotted yet, but the adventurers were apparently having a hard time traversing through the hotter areas. This dungeon wasn't suited for beings that didn't have fire resistance. He as a runesmith lord had heat resistance in his armor. His wolf puppy was naturally resistant to a degree to flames that left his assistant. Bernier had his own set of armor prepared with some chilling runes. The half-dwarf didn't have much mana to speak of, so the armor he was wearing could only defend him against the flames. At first, Roland wanted to just buy some cheap iron or steel armor for his new assistant. But he on the other hand begged him for something else. He wanted to make his own armor and then have runes inscribed later. This was a good opportunity to see if he made the good choice in hiring him. Bernier did have the class and levels, but this didn't mean that he would be great at crafting. This depended on his aptitude and willingness to work long hours. Luckily the young half-dwarf didn't disappoint him. He worked tirelessly for days at the basic workshop without any runic power tools involved. Even without the fancy equipment, his new worker had managed to push through. What Bernier required wasn't a full-plate mail armor like Roland did. He needed some defense to be there, but the more important thing was speed and agility. Bernier wasn't there to fight, he was only there to carry Roland's weapons and then take care of the monster corpses. Thus he was fitted out in a lighter set of leather armor. His legs and arms would have metal plates in the form of greaves and vambraces. Roland had also instructed him to place openings for the mana stones that he would insert later. With Bernier's lack of mana and any runic skills, he would need all the help he could get for the magic to work. There was a limit of how many mana stones a steel armor could take. The runic structures would break quite fast, but it would be enough for them to do a couple of dungeon runs before it needed repairing. Runic structures that only utilized buffing type spells and small effect spells like the Lesser Chilling Rune were able to last longer than active spells. Something like a fire arrow spell would eat away at the armor after each activation due to the high amount of mana being burned. On the other hand, when there was a very small yet constant charge, they lasted for a lot longer. This was also why Roland's own armor that was made of deep steel would barely suffer anything when he just activated his mana stones to give him a stat buff. Only when he actually activated a more drastic spell would the armor start to deteriorate. After everything was finished, the gear came out to be on the intermediate level, quite satisfactory. Roland himself could only achieve this level, and this half-dwarf was already on his level. He wasn't sure if it was talent or just the dwarf racial trait that let them become better blacksmiths than other races. With that out of the way, he was ready to imbue everything with mana stones and runes. Bernier was a bit afraid that he would be charged for something like this. The man was someone that grew up with other dwarves, so he knew that runesmithing was a costly profession. The two had a conversation, and Roland told him to count it as an investment that he could just work down in the future. Using mana stones from the dungeon on an armor like this didn't really hurt his bottom line. The dwarves cherished their runesmiths though, so from that day on, Bernier started calling him boss, and he finally learned to remember his assistant's name. Now they were down at the 10th level where it all started. This time around the boss chamber was wide open and they could move through it. It also seemed that someone had already cleared out this area some time ago. The monsters haven't respawned yet, but there are no bodies either. Anyone that was here previously is probably gone, Roland said while moving inside of the boss chamber. It looks that way. Bernier stopped before the large door and gave out a sigh. He stood there for a moment till Agni barked at him while sitting on Roland's shoulder. Wait for me, I'm coming. After the harrowing experience that Bernier went through in this room, it was natural for him to take a moment. Roland didn't say anything as he understood his pain. It was already quite a show of character that his new assistant was willing to go down here so soon. Looks the same as last time. Why yet? Both of them continued through the area. Agni was held in place as his new owner was afraid that the happy puppy could fall into the lava lake below. He was somewhat resistant to flames and heat, but he would still die if he fell into lava. Roland was taking a risk by bringing this puppy here. After watching over him for a month, the ruby wolf started growing on him. Agni would even try to climb into his bed and sleep with him. This caused Roland to finally create a fitting doghouse for him that Bernier, with his better building skills, was happy to create. His new canine companion had started to listen to his commands. He decided that he could at least try descending to the lower levels to fight some monsters. His own tamed monster would get a lot more experience from Tier 2 enemies than what they were fighting on the upper levels. Bernier, here. Agni was passed over to Bernier for safekeeping. Being a similar monster to a dog, Agni would be accepting to more people than just his master. From what Roland could tell, he was seeing Bernier as part of the pack with his master as the alpha. Stay in the back, the monsters below shouldn't be able to go above the stairs. After leaving the boss chamber, there was another flight of stairs leading to the next section. The moment the small group reached it, they were greeted by hot air. Roland was wearing a full helmet with a closed visor, so he didn't feel it. Bernier, on the other hand, who was only wearing a simple metal headgear with his face exposed, was taken aback. You can activate the rune now, it should alleviate the heat. Following Roland's instruction, the blue mana stones that were inserted into Bernier's armor started to glow. A thin veil of blue ice energy covered the half-dwarf's whole body and made the whole thing bearable. Agni didn't look too happy about the change in temperature though, as he gave out a rather cute sneeze. Well then. With sword and shield in hand, Roland moved down from the stairs and set foot in the new area. What he saw was a wide-open cavern with stalactites and stalagmites everywhere. There were flowing rivers and small lakes of fire present as well. The lava seemed to be pouring from the walls and into those streams and lakes alike. There were many pathways leading in various directions. Some were wide while others could barely fit one person. This was a large open area that stretched for many kilometers in all directions. There was only one known exit to the top, which made traversing the whole area difficult without anyone with directional skills like a tracker. "Be careful, boss. Yeah, I know there could be monsters in those lava pools." The sector where he was in now had a larger piece of land on it with some smaller lava pools spread around. In those sizzling hot pots, there could be monsters hiding, ones that were resistant to flames. He came prepared, knowing the weaknesses of the foes an adventurer was facing was the basics. With the degree of fire protection that he was wearing, he felt rather content at venturing forward. SSSSSSSSSSSS. There it was, his first opponent that was crawling out of one of those smaller pools of lava. Some of them were connected to the larger lakes and rivers that were flowing in the back. Luckily none of the larger monsters would be able to fit through the smaller openings. Volcanic Salamander L54. It was an evolved variant of the salamander monster he saw in the labyrinth. This one was quite larger, more the size of a smaller horse but with shorter legs. Its scales looked more robust and had a more brownish tint to it that let it blend in with the darker volcanic soil here. The monster slammed its elongated tail into the ground, causing it to crack in a few places as it noticed Roland looking at it. The large salamander started hissing while looking at its target. Roland at this moment was hiding behind his shield while getting closer. He was sure to keep watch if there weren't any other enemies nearby. Without a seasoned tracker to detect enemies, he needed to be extra careful. Soon the battle started with a bark coming from the back. Bernier was sure to hold Agni in his hands while peeking from around the corner. What he saw was the monster moving its head upwards, the lower part of its neck started bulging out and glowing in a red color as it prepared an attack. Roland didn't need much time to figure out what it was doing. There were a few possibilities of defending against this type of attack. He chose to dodge instead of using his shield to block as this attack was somewhat slow. The monster opened up its mouth and a ball of heated magma was flung from it. It connected with the ground where Roland was previously standing on and caused an explosion. He on the other hand was glowing in green after activating his runic structure. This type of attack that the monster performed was quite powerful. Even he that was wearing magical armor wouldn't come out unscathed if he just received it. It did have one glaring weakness as it left the person or monster using it open for a quick counter. Normally something like this would be better used for a finishing move on an opponent that couldn't move. "Got you!" he called out while pointing his hand at the creature. Roland had gotten in range for a magical attack. This came in the form of a cone of cold spell that was inscribed on his gauntlet. The surge of icy air and ice crystals descended on the volcanic salamander. Due to this monster living in a warm climate, it couldn't take low temperatures very well. It suffered massive damage while also losing most of its mobility. A critical hit that rendered his opponent immobile was just the thing he needed. With a nice slice from his blade, the head was off and the battle was won. You have gained 358 experience. Not bad, using magic against these fire monster feels like cheating. He looked at the dead monster while putting his sword away. It didn't take much for him to kill it, using the creature's weakness made everything quite easy. He didn't feel like he would lose to it without the spell either, he would just need to take a bit more time. Okay, don't see any other monsters. The party that cleared out the boss chamber must have killed most of them at the entrance. Bernier, we will wait here for now, more should respawn soon. Roland decided to wait at the safe spot for now. This was the first time that he was here, so he needed to get used to the stronger tier 2 monsters. He liked to do things slow and steady without rushing too much into danger. With the puppy and his assistant, he also needed to keep the two safe. On it, boss. Bernier moved in and Agni was quick to jump on the dead salamander. He looked like a proud warrior that had slain this monster himself. Roland just smirked a bit and gave the puppy's head a ruffling. After the monster was done being processed, it was time to do some grinding. Chapter 94 Windmill. Okay, boss, you can go ahead. HNGH. Roland, in his everyday clothes but with gloves that were glowing red, was pushing a large wooden spire. It looked like a large thick wooden log with a peculiar contraption attached to the top part. That's it, just a bit more now, stop. He was quick to move to the other side to stabilize the construction. This large tower-like log was inserted into a hole, and while Roland was holding onto it, Bernier moved over with a wheelbarrow. In it there was something that looked similar to plaster or cement with a similar dark grey coloring. This substance was something very similar but made with the help of alchemy instead of chemicals. With the help of monster remains, this world had made its own strides in the way of construction. After dumping the contents, Bernier grabbed a smaller plank from the side and started smoothing this fantasy cement out. "It will take half a day for this to dry, boss." Roland nodded while continuing to support the larger structure with his enhanced strength. In his previous world, people would have to use cranes for something like this. With his current tier 2 stats and some help from strength-enhancing runes, he was able to heft this burden. "But boss, will this windmill work? Isn't it too thin?" Bernier scratched his nose while attaching some support beams to this windmill. In reality, this wasn't anything like that. It was a small wind turbine that Roland finally got around to building. With the help of his assistant, he could speed up the process, making cables and the small parts for the propellers and generator that was inside. The cables were pushed through the large log that added some well-needed weight. This was his first design, so he decided to make the fans a bit smaller. Thus, even when they would be spinning at full swing, the structure would remain stable in place. "This isn't a windmill, this is to generate power." Power. Bernier looked at the wind turbine and he wasn't sure how this thing should produce energy. Though Roland was the runesmith here, so he wouldn't ask too many questions. He understood that magic and runes were a difficult theme not known by many men. "I guess it is about time to show you some things, but first help me connect these cables." The wires they were using were simple copper ones. They were coated in a dark rubber-like substance that worked quite similar to its old world counterpart. Luckily, these wires didn't require runesmithing, as they were just there to carry the current towards the generator in his runic workshop. Roland had decided to move to wind energy, as keeping a boiler down in his workshop was causing some difficulties. The engine that he made was also not very efficient at all. He had a couple of options here. One would be water energy, like people used in dams. The problem was that there was no river nearby. Another option would be geothermal. With a lava dungeon nearby, this could be a possibility, but he needed something closer to his house. Thus wind turbines were the next good option. He could easily place multiple ones in his yard behind his house. Even if he placed some outside his fence, no one would probably complain, and he might be able to buy more land if he wished for. The biggest downside to this setup was that it was clearly visible to anyone. If a person decided to walk through here, they would see some strange-looking windmills spinning around. It was clear that he wasn't using them for grain and making bread. He might be able to say that they were for pumping water. They were also used for cutting wood at sawmills, though they saw less use in this kind of world where a woodcutter had enhanced strength and specialized skills to make everything go fast. He noticed this trend that filled this world around him. The people here tended not to look for shortcuts to their work. They would naturally gain more skills and level up. They got faster and better at everything by just continuing to train. Most of them didn't see the reason to invest in unique inventions. The only progress was seen towards magic and alchemy, while machinery was left in the dust. "Bark! Could you stop digging in the yard?" Roland scolded Agni, who was busy digging up a hole and burying something in it. After the puppy had settled in, some changes needed to be made. For one thing, he needed to remove the trip mines from the ground, as the little wolf was quite happy to dig them out. Luckily, Roland got to him in time before any explosions happened. With this in mind, another larger construction plan for the defenses was fashioned. This one would eliminate the random chance of his allies injuring themselves in his backyard. With the wind turbine in place and Bernier to help him out, they would connect the electricity with the fences. Implementing the electric fence would take a bit to make, as he needed the wind turbine to power the items in his workshop first. Depending on how much juice this turbine produced, he would go ahead with the fence idea. Roland knew that the jolt that the fence would give wouldn't keep real threats away. It was more of a warning signal for people to keep out. Smart individuals would probably notice this and think twice before venturing forward. Others might just vault over this wall and try their luck inside. With unique defenses came unique rewards, without some danger there were no real rewards. Not having the mines around puts this place at risk. Are there any automated defenses that I could build here? He grumbled while looking at the ruby tip of his wolf puppy. The little guy was having a blast while turning his land into Swiss cheese. Boss, why don't you build a golem? Bernier moved over while whipping some sweat from his brow. The half-dwarf had been taught by his father while he was alive, so he knew some inside rumors and knowledge. Runesmiths were similar to other magic users by the use of their runes. Their true strength lay in creating magical items. One of those was a staple, the iron golem. I never tried that before. He had thought about making one before, but his lack of knowledge kept him grounded. Now he more or less knew how such a creature would be able to operate. It was like the monster that he faced, it needed a core first. This would act as the main power source and could be bought on the market or even from the dungeon directly. In the volcanic area, some golems could be spotted. If he nabbed one of those cores he would be able to try it out. Without any master, he would need to do everything himself. The probability of getting a golem making manual in the auction house was slim. The runesmiths kept their more detailed secrets hidden. Luckily for Roland, he had lived in a large crafting city for a few years and golems was something that it did possess. The only problem was that he could never examine them fully. He was left with fleeting glances here and there while the various magical automatons moved around. His old notebook was filled out with parts of these runic structures, but he never tried to piece them together as he was lacking the main component. This component was the internal runic code that would make this golem work. Even though he thought that he could somehow work out the runic structures going through the body from the golem core. The most important part, that was the control program. This golem would need to be able to move around and follow basic instructions. The ones that he saw in the city were mostly only able to slowly move around and carry heavy items. They were mostly meant for constructions, while the more combat-oriented golems were hard to come by. The fastest way for him to make his own golem would be by buying one of the auction and then examining the program and runes inside. Then with it as a base, he would start applying his own custom-made commands. That would probably be the fastest way to go around this. He remembered how much time he lost when not getting a magical item with a mana stone in it. If he didn't get that lucky break, he might still think that mana stones were used as batteries to this day. I'm kind of self-taught, but if you see any golems, even the small toy ones, you have the permission to buy it. Roland replied to Bernier while putting the golem construction off for now. It would take way too long to construct an operating program to make it run from scratch. Making one that activated separate runic spells was one thing, making a basic AI that could follow spoken orders was another thing entirely. It could take him several years to even come up with a prototype that would need even more time to fix. Toy ones. Yes, some runesmiths make small automatons that can follow orders, some nobles buy them for their children, at least they are cheaper than the large ones. He had actually seen one of those a long time ago when he first arrived in this world, but that was a time that he had long forgotten and moved on from. While thinking about some defensive measures, he noticed Agni from the side munching on something. You really like those, don't you? Roland narrowed his eyes while he spotted something shiny in the puppy's mouth. He's got quite the expensive appetite. Bernier commented while walking away to do some other chores while the wind turbine foundation set. Agni had developed a strange diet after going down into the dungeon. While one of the monster corpses was getting taken apart, the mana stone fell to the side. The little puppy looked at this glowing gem and ran up to it. With a big chomp, the mana stone was quickly gulped down by him fully. Roland and Bernier saw this and tried to make the puppy spit out the stone, unsure if he would suffer from such a thing. After looking through the wolf's stats, no drop of HP or strange status effects were noticed by Roland. There was one addition to this status in the form of a skill. Mana Stone Eater passive. Allows for a small chance of strengthening through mana stone consumption. This skill looked quite powerful. Gaining strength just by eating mana stones seemed very powerful. In reality, ever since getting it Agni only received 1 status point. Somehow this skill could allow the user to gain status points through consuming mana stones. If there was something more that could be gained was unknown. Roland wasn't happy about losing so many mana stones to his canine companion. For now, he was only devouring lesser mana stones and it seemed that he couldn't devour more than 2 per day. It was apparent that the digestion of these stones took a while. If Agni tried to snack on more than 1 every 12 hours he would get a stomach ache. I hope that skill allows for a better evolution. Speaking of evolutions. Roland glanced at Agni's stats which had gone up. His little companion was close to reaching the 25th level and just needed 2 more. When he hit that threshold he would be allowed to evolve. From what Roland knew, a ruby wolf puppy would evolve into an adolescent ruby wolf at the 25th level. After that, at the 50th level he should turn into a plain ruby wolf and be a tier 2 monster. There might be other possibilities along the way. For instance, the more common version of a ruby wolf was the volcanic wolf. That type of monster could be seen in the volcanic area past the 10th level of the maze. There was no reason for taking that evolutionary path as a ruby wolf was considered stronger and also smarter than a volcanic variant. If I go by this world's naming sense and that skill, maybe he'll change into something like a mana ruby wolf. Would Roland's pup have a similar class naming scheme that he had succumbed to? His classes were one of the better ones but the names left a lot to be desired. It would still be better to go with a rare evolution even if it had a silly name. Bernier. Roland called out to his worker and gave him a plan of the house that had the cable placements. Follow the schematic. I'll go to the dungeon with Agni, he is close to leveling up. Before leaving Bernier with a shovel to bury the cables he had him help him get his armor on. The tamed monster along with the wind turbine and his new assistant kept him from improving on his old design. He wanted to focus on it after Agni got a bit stronger and with the first evolution, he would feel more comfortable doing so. The tier 1 skills were easy to level up and with the help of Roland's deep pockets, he could buy recovery items for his monster. With them Agni was able to increase the levels of all his skills with minimal rest. The only one that didn't max out was the one for eating mana stones. Depending on the evolution choices, Roland was ready to wait for it to max out later. Then he would focus on crafting while Agni munched on some stones. Recently he had visited the dungeon quite often so he needed some downtime. Alright boss, have a safe trip and bring back some souvenirs. You sure like going through those monster remains, don't you Bernier? I just need some salamander leather for my coat, that stuff is easy to work with. The two parted ways and Roland departed towards the dungeon. He didn't keep Agni on his shoulder anymore but let him walk side by side. The puppy also had a nice black leather collar with his name on it. There was 1 green mana stone that would increase the pup's speed if he used it. Surprisingly, his monster companion was smart enough to learn how to use simple runic equipment. He only started having problems when there were more than 2 enchantments on it. Due to that he only put in the speed increase along with a mana shield for protection. Thanks to this his little canine companion also earned the title of magic item user. This was probably because not many monsters could use magic items or knew how. A regular human would not get a title like this due to this being something their race was able to do by default. The two were back in the dungeon now. This started feeling like his everyday grind now. He killed monsters in the morning to gather materials and mana stones. Then in the evening, he enchanted some weapons and armor parts to sell at the auction house. The money was then spent on more materials to expand his workshop and the cycle continued. A snapping of bones brought him back to reality as a flaming skeleton dropped to the ground. Agni did a little wiggle dance around the monster while sniffing but then quickly turned around. His hind legs performed the motion of burying something as if he wasn't interested in the bony creature. No mana stones, hey? You got a good nose for those ever since you have gotten that skill. They continued into the deeper levels of the dungeon but not below the 5th. Past that the monsters were above the 25th level and could prove dangerous for his little puppy. He wanted him to gain the rest of the experience by himself without getting power leveled by him. After spending half the day down here, it was finally time for the little guy to level up. With a glance at the status screen, it was apparent that an evolution was possible. Name: Ruby Wolf Puppy L25X, Max. Type: Fire/Earth/Beast. HP: 264/264. MP: 210/210. SP: 445/445. Strength: 20. Agility: 35. Dexterity: 15. Vitality: 18. Endurance: 28. Intelligence: 15. Willpower: 15. Charisma: 16. Luck: 14. Roland could clearly see that Agni wasn't able to gain any more experience. From what the old gnome at the Adventurers Guild had told him, he needed to focus on this experience counter that was maxed out. After he did, he could see multiple options become clear to him. He rubbed his chin while looking over them. It was time to make a decision or wait till his tamed monster leveled up his skills more. Chapter 95, Weighting the Options. Adolescent Volcanic Wolf. Fire/Earth/Beast. A common canine type monster found in volcanic regions. Their noticeable feature is their growing mane covered in volcanic rocks. Adolescent Ruby Wolf. Fire/Earth/Beast. An uncommon canine type monster found in volcanic regions. Their noticeable feature is their growing mane covered in rubies. Adolescent Gemstone Wolf. Fire/Earth/Beast. A rare canine type monster found in deep dungeons. Their noticeable feature is their growing mane adorned with various gemstones. Hellhound Puppy. Fire/Fiend/Beast. An uncommon canine fiend type of monster. This type of monster is regularly seen accompanied by demonic beings. Adolescent Ash Wolf. Earth/Beast. A common canine type wolf found in dungeons. They are characterized by having a white ashy fur pattern. Roland was now glancing at the evolution options that he was given. There were 5 of them, with 2 uncommon variants and 1 rare. There was one peculiar option with the Hellhound that caused the puppy to stay as a young type. From what he knew, these types of evolution options were a rare sight. They would more or less reset the current monster progress and turn them into a different type. Here his Ruby Wolf would transform into a Hellhound puppy, which would change it from a wolf to a dog and also give him a fiend type along with the beast type. A rare type doesn't mean that it is particularly better than an uncommon one. He rubbed his chin while reading through the explanations. There wasn't much information given about the skills these evolution options would give. Normally he wanted to go for the Ruby variant at first, as that was the original type of monster Agni was. Now there was another option with the Gemstone Wolf, which was probably there due to the new mana stone eating skill his puppy gained. The Volcanic and Ashen Wolf types looked like the more generic ones, with the Ashen one even losing the fire type in the evolution. There was also the option of going with a Hellhound and starting anew. Then when the time came to evolve again, there could be some rare options for the Hellhound type. Though these types of monster were considered the more violent type, which could pose some trouble down the line. What do you think, Agni? Ruby Wolf or Gemstone Wolf? Or maybe a Hellhound? Bark. The little guy started barking and running around. It was clear that he wouldn't get much out of this baby monster and would have to make the choice himself. Let's go back home for now, Agni. Roland decided to stall this evolution. He needed to get more information about these advancement options. The mana eating skill wasn't fully matured yet either, so there might be some other evolutionary option if he maxed it out. There was no rush for something as important as an evolution. There were sometimes options to reset like the Hellhound one, but those were super rare. The Ruby Wolf options would not be there again. It was impossible to go around in circles until someone made up their mind. The only thing he could go off of his books or by experience from tamers. The two returned home to discover a quite drunk Bernier hammering away while shaping some nails. There was also a use for those and a lot of scrap metal to go around. His assistant was also very close to reaching level 50 now, which would also let him advance further. EY boss, welcome back. I put the cables where you wanted. Want me to help you undress? Bernier noticed Roland walking back into the house as his runic armor was quite characteristic. The half-dwarf's face was quite red, but he was actually able to work in such a state. If he would be able to do the same thing when power tools were introduced was something Roland was afraid of. It was one thing to swing a hammer and another to handle a runic saw that could take out a limb. No, it's fine, we'll connect everything tomorrow. He didn't bother his assistant as Bernier was clearly working hard to get his level up. Since hitting the 48th level, he was tirelessly using his smithing skills to grind up towards this important occasion. It was also getting late after spending most of the day down in the dungeon. When Roland opened up the door to the house, Agni was quick to jump in and go to his spot. He had one right next to Roland's own bed, and even though there was a perfectly fine doghouse outside, the puppy liked to sleep here. With time, Roland gave in to the whines and barks, not being able to fight against the deadly puppy stare. Here, catch. Roland tossed Agni a nice-looking mana stone and the puppy began munching on it almost instantly. Enough time had passed since the last one, so it was fine now. After getting undressed, it was time to look over some plans. The wind turbine would be getting connected tomorrow, so he needed to go through some things. At this point in time, some months had passed since his new assistant had arrived. Even though he didn't want to reveal his secret lair below his house, it was inevitable that it would be. It was clearly obvious that he was doing rune crafting somewhere in his house. Even with some sound-cancelling runes to keep the noise of his smithing away from prying ears, it was easy for Bernier to figure things out. The decision was made to show his assistant his secret workshop that he had now locked behind a special magic magnetic lock. By being able to focus on studying the runes, he started to crack the code slowly. With time, he hoped to not need to look at other people's work or use his debugging skill to just steal the working designs. With the knowledge of the magic programming language, he wanted to construct his own magic, maybe even make something new that never existed in this world before. If I can't install any mine runes for now, I could go with a normal alarm system. Roland was still on the fence on what to do instead of the mine approach. It was too deadly with his puppy and new assistant around. He needed something different, maybe something that could tell the two apart from unwanted guests. I could make something akin to a photocell alarm system. With some knowledge of his old world, he came up with one of the classics. By placing some light sensors around the fence, he would know if someone passed through it. He recalled one of the popular movies, where the hero had to evade many red laser beams that would trigger the alarm. It was an easy solution and could be placed around the fences away from his assistant and puppy. I wonder if I could make some automated magical weapons. Then there was another thing that he wanted to do. His land was fenced up in a square shape. At each corner, there was a smaller tower made of hardwood. Thanks to Bernier that was good at building things, the fence had been redone to actually be proper. Roland was thinking about placing magical devices at those corners which would turn them into sort of defensive towers. It would be easy for him to connect the alarm system to this sort of attacking device. It would only require some mana from his generator to run. He could also use a reusable scroll system that didn't use up much of his mana reserves in the generator. The difficult task would be for it to actually hit a moving target. Creating a magic device that shot fire arrows in random directions wouldn't work. He needed to use something different, something that could be guided. There are special self-guiding spells that could work for now. There were variations of his favorite magic arrow spell that guided itself onto the target. If he also inscribed it in the highest grade, it would actually be quite accurate. He wanted the towers to react to the intruders and aim themselves, but he would need to stick to the basics for now. Maybe if he figured out that golem operating system, he would be able to put it in his defensive towers. I don't think thieves will expect getting chased by magic arrows the moment they set foot here. That will probably require more wind turbines. I'd also have to reinforce the house walls. Even with guided arrows, they can still hit the house. With more intricate spells, the requirement for mana was also there. If he wanted to make everything work, he needed to build more. Otherwise, he would have to somehow include scrolls into the circuit. With more moving components there was always more that could go astray during the activation process. Okay, let me draw up some schematics, but first. Before moving on with his work, he peeked outside his workshop. He saw his puppy drooling into the large pillow that was his bedding. The beast is asleep, I can work in peace. Roland gently removed himself from the room Agni was sleeping in and moved back into his workshop where he could focus on his work. There was also the idea of reusable wands or runic plates that he wanted to mount into his armor, placing it somewhere around his forearm area. This was for easy access while also was there to allow him to point with his hands at the target. Most of the spell would be on the plate while the discharge rune that created the spell outside would be on his palm. With this, it would look as if he was actually casting spells even though he would be just activating separate runic structures on the added components to his armor. Most of the strain would fall on those reusable parts while his glove would only degrade just a little bit. Thanks to it already being from deep steel, the damage would be minimal. The reusable components on the other hand could be made from cheap iron or steel. With that in mind, he got to drawing. He had made some previous iterations but he was focused on leveling up his new puppy so he didn't progress much. I'll use a lesser bolt of guidance spell in this design, doesn't puck as much of a punch but can be cast repeatedly without much damage to the equipment. His penmanship had increased by leaps and bounds after reaching tier 2. His dexterity was now doubled and he had access to the upper tier scribing skills that were slowly leveling up. With this, he was able to draw up multiple runic schematics within minutes. Regretfully, his little leveling cheat had plateaued with time. Even common grade runic schematics didn't give him that much. By this point it would be faster to go into the dungeon and massacre some tier 2 beasts in the lava region. He was strong enough to even take on multiple of those now, which left his debugging trick in the dust. Maybe if he got his hands on some tier 3 runic schematics he would be able to progress faster once more. The problem with that was the rarity and exorbitant prices. The only realistic way of getting them would be buying something with a tier 3 rune in a store or at the auction. The prices for common grade armor and weapons were already steep. Something at a higher tier was not something he could afford at the moment. At least not while he was spending a lot on building his turbines and defensive systems. That should be it. Think we will need a lot more copper wires to get to all the towers. I'll just tell Bernier to fetch it tomorrow. Roland yawned while stretching. It had gotten late into the night and it was time to sleep. Agni noticed him leaving the workshop and was fast to tackle his leg. You should probably go do your business. He let the puppy outside while he himself went to take a bath. Time continued to tick and it was the next day. Roland always got up quite early thanks to his sleeping resistance skill. Bernier on the other hand was a deep sleeper, even more after drinking through the day. Hey, wake up! I need you to fetch something from the market. The sun was already up so Roland didn't have any bad feelings about waking his assistant up. His foot kicked the door to the log cabin that was now used as Bernier's new place of lodging. It was also his smithy that was slowly getting new and better equipment made by the half-dwarf himself. Is he still sleeping? If you go now I'll give you money for that wine you were drooling over. After the sentence was uttered he could hear a strange loud thud in the log shed. This was quickly followed by a lot of metallic tools falling over and him hearing Bernier shouting some profanities. I'm up. I should dock his pay for pretending to be sleeping. Roland waited another minute to see a half-dressed Bernier coming over to meet him. The moment he opened the door the smell of spirit filled Roland's nostrils. This was something he was already used to and other dwarven workshops were quite similar. Finally you're up, here go pick these things on the market. If you can barter down the prices you can buy that wine of yours. Thank you, boss. Roland thought that Bernier would be a bit dejected that he would only get the wine if he bartered well enough. It seemed that it was enough to just give him a chance at getting it for him to be happy. While Bernier was packing up Roland decided to work on his magic arm guard design. There were enough steel plates in place for him to make some prototypes. With the ethereal pathways skill also leveling up it was a lot easier to connect them to the main armor. The two parted ways and started the day off early. Bernier hefted up his backpack and looked at his workshop while smiling. It just took him a few months, but now he felt like he really could be a proper blacksmith. The person that had hired him was an oddball but also a good person. After locking up the log cabin and saying his goodies to Agni that was nibbling on his morning mana stone, he left. Bernier was not provided with a working runic bicycle, so he needed to do his work on foot. Roland didn't deny him one outright. The problem was in Bernier not having enough mana to last him towards the city. Even mana stones didn't alleviate this issue much, so he was left with his own 2 legs. It was still only a 30-minute walk, so Bernier just used it to take in the sights and think about what he could craft next. One of the reasons he was so excited today was not only for the wine but also that he was close to reaching level 50. His boss had promised to show him some of his runic items if he managed to pass into the 2nd tier. Mornin'. Good morning. Bernier greeted the gate guards that already knew him. There weren't that many half-dwarfs in this city with huge backpacks like his. Since getting his new job he was a lot happier, thus his more extroverted personality came out. Thanks to this, getting good prices at the market was easy. While Bernier was trying to haggle down on the price of the copper, Roland ordered a group of 5 adventurers was walking down the street. One person from the group then came to a stop while glancing towards the market. Isn't that? Hey Garland, what are you doing? Get a move on. Wait Devon, look at that. The 2 men exchanged some glances and both of them started looking in Bernier's direction. Soon a smirk appeared on both of their faces while the other 3 adventurers went over to see what was going on. Well, isn't it our little Bernier awfully chipper, isn't he? That he is, reckon we should remind him of how we treat old friends. The group of men moved to the side into a lonesome alley while keeping watch over the market. What they were up to only they knew, but it didn't look that it was anything peaceful. Chapter 96, Tracking down the perpetrators. What's taking him so long? Roland looked at the runic clock that he made in his free time. Bernier had been gone for quite some time and was running late. Roland had lost himself in rune crafting on one of his newest inventions and didn't notice that it was already the middle of the day. Did he go get drunk in a tavern or something? He started imagining Bernier getting a good deal of the copper and other metals that he sent him for. Roland had stated that he could use some of that money to buy the brand wine that Bernier loved so much. While holding his new runic component that he could attach to his armor at the forearm. With the improvements to his tier he was able to work much faster even with common grade runes. The need to watch out for his mana also started to fade away. There was no need to take long meditation breaks between rune smithing. Only when doing some large projects like his whole crimson armor would that be now a requirement. In his hands, he had 2 new prototypes of a new spell weapon. The new runic weapons that he made were something he came up after remembering an old movie. It used quite a bit of mana to work, but it was something to be feared. There was a possibility of shifting the tides of battle due to the unique movement and destructive power. He had already tested this design out beforehand and now he had just made it connect to his own armor and to the runic program. I'll have to give these a final test later, but now. Roland also started to think about having a talk with Bernier about that drinking problem. It was all fun and games to look at a drunkard having fun, but when it impacted their work then there was a problem. Due to the half-dwarf not returning faster he wasn't able to get his wind turbine up and running. Thus he shifted his attention to weapon crafting, but now it was done as well and his assistant was still missing. Before he could think about a punishment he heard Agni barking out loudly. What is it, boy? The barking was quite loud and prolonged. It was clear that Agni noticed someone or something. The most obvious explanation was that it was Bernier coming back, but for some reason, these barks sounded a bit different than usual. There was no time to put on his armor at this moment, but Roland didn't like the sound of those frantic barks. It was clear that there was something off about them, thus he decided to at least put on his gloves and helmet. After grabbing his sword and shield from the side he was finally ready. Who is it? Roland called out while going outside, but there was no one there, only Agni scratching at the entrance gate. After looking around for some enemies he focused on that gate and could somewhat hear something. There was a certain sound of something being dragged, this was accompanied by heavy footsteps. There was no answer to his question, instead of it a loud noise of someone hitting the ground followed by a grunt. He was momentarily stunned as he could more or less recognize to whom that grunt belonged. This also explained why Agni was scratching at the large gate door to go outside. "What the Bernir is that you?" Without getting an answer he rushed outside. There he saw him. Bernir was down on the ground, his clothes torn up. The characteristic backpack that he always wore was gone. It seemed to Roland that his assistant was robbed. The surprising thing about this was that it was broad daylight and the city was more or less safe. "Hey, can you hear me?" Roland ran up to Bernir and handled his body gently. His assistant was breathing, which was a good sign, but after turning him around he frowned. Bernir's nose was clearly broken and bloody. His lip was cut up and his face was swollen. If not treated it would balloon even more. "Who did this to you? Were there bandits on the way here?" His first thought was bandits, as something like this would be hard to miss in the city. The guards would have at least seen him limping away and helped him to some extent. Fights broke out in the city, but Bernir here was beaten half to death. Even without looking at his body he could tell that some of his bones were broken. "Ugh." There was no reply to the question. Bernir was clearly on his last breath. He probably used the last of his stamina to drag himself here, soon he would pass out. "Shit, hold on." Roland placed the bloodied Bernir down gently without moving him inside of the house. It would be dangerous to carry him around without properly tending to the wounds first. "Drink this." While preparing for some home invaders, Roland had taken one of his storage bags with potions. He used one of the better health potions on Bernir's wounds. He splashed one right on his face while another one was used on his banged up leg. That is before forcing it in the right place for the healing to start. If done incorrectly, the bone would heal in the wrong place, which would then have to be broken once more to heal correctly. Bernir was out cold at this point, so luckily he wouldn't need to feel the pain from having his bone set. Only after doing this did he decide to pick him up to carry him to the house. During the whole debacle, Agni was on the side whimpering with a curled-up tail. Bernir was placed on the couch and Roland removed his clothes with the help of his knife. The clothes that he was wearing were filled with sweat and dried-up blood. There was no use keeping them around. Damn, did they have to go this far? He could see many bruises on Bernir's chest, stomach, and other vital areas. This doesn't look like a bandit attack, this looks personal. After washing away some of that blood from his assistant's beaten-up body, Roland realized this. A bandit wouldn't go to these lengths. They would also not leave their victim alive unless Bernir was lucky to get away. His limp leg that seemed broken told another tale. From what Roland was seeing, it looked like Bernir was beaten up thoroughly. It was as if the person that did it had a grudge against him or wanted to pay him back for something. He didn't really ask about his assistant's past, and he didn't think someone like him would have many enemies. These wounds were all done by fists as well. If he was robbed by some thieves, some knife cuts would be there, as those types wouldn't bother with roughing their victims up to this extent. He was also left alive, which indicated that the perpetrators didn't fear any form of retaliation. He's not waking up anytime soon. Could they have been some Rouge adventurers? Roland started to debate on who could have done such a thing, but the more he thought about it, the angrier he became. After living with the silly half-dwarf for a few months, the drunk had grown on him. He was his boss, and a boss was someone that took care of their employees. Fuck. His fist descended on a nearby chair, which turned to scrap wood in an instant. His increased strength paired up with the deep steel gauntlets that he was wearing caused fatal damage to the inanimate object. Bark, bark, bark. Agni started sniffing Bernir around, and afterward, he continued to bark. He started to run around in a circle before pointing with his nose at the door as if he wanted to go out. "What do you?" Roland noticed his monster's strange behavior, but he soon realized what he was trying to tell him. "Did you get the scent of the one who did this to Bernir?" Woof. At the question, Agni started bouncing around even more. He was a canine type of monster, and after a couple of levels, he had earned a tracking skill as well. With his nose, it was possible to find the perpetrators of this robbery. The only problem was that there was a short window that this could be done. The trail would go cold in a few hours and then he could only ask Bernier about it. He knew his assistant well enough now. It was probable that he wouldn't tell him the truth about this attack. He could have had history with the perpetrators and wouldn't want to report this to the city watch either. The backpack was his, so he didn't owe Roland anything for it, and he would probably work hard to pay back for the copper and money that was stolen. Now or never. Bernier's situation was stabilized. The healing potions worked wonders, but they wouldn't help the injured person wake up faster. Roland also wasn't sure if he wanted him to be awake for the thing that he was about to do. I can't handle any tier 3s, but if it's only tier 2s below the 100th level, then. He grasped the bloodied cloth that he used to clean Bernier's beaten-up body and looked at it. It was clear to him that the assailants could have gone back to the city. Causing a scene there would bring unwanted attention. His reputation as a strange runesmith living in the woods made him a neutral element in the city. He felt that the Adventurers Guild would take his side if he was able to prove the theft. Bernier's bag was something very characteristic among the guild. If the robbers had it on them, it could be the proof that he needed. Roland had told him to mark the backpack with his initials in a hard-to-find spot just for such an occasion. Roland felt angry. He knew that the rational thing to do now would be to not do anything hasty. The backpack was an item that cost a lot of gold, but it was replaceable just like the things in it. But would that approach keep him and Bernier from harm's way in the future? No, this is not how this world works. He started going down into his workshop. His feet were slow and a myriad of thoughts was going through his head, mostly telling him that this was a bad idea. Roland had hidden himself away in this house to evade trouble, but even then it found him. One good way of showing people to not trifle with him was a show of strength. Reporting it to the authorities could be a dead end, as status, power, and money were the only things that moved the people on the top. If he continued to hide, people would come. When it came to light that Bernier was living with him and he did nothing about this, he could be seen as an easy target. Someone could decide to put that up to the test sooner or later. Hiding his strength could backfire in the near future, but having a high profile also brought in many other issues that he was trying to avoid. If he acted, then the news of a particular runesmith would probably circulate through the city. He would alert everyone to his presence. If this would cause more trouble down the road remained to be seen. He placed his helmet on his head as he was now ready. The weapons that he previously constructed were still attached to his forearms as he decided to take them along. After checking all of his gear, he walked out with his shield on his back and his sword to the side. This time around he would go with the classics, as a sword and shield were quite versatile against humans. Agni, do you still have the scent? Woof. The wolf puppy barked and sniffed Bernier some more before charging out through the door. His master was left behind to lock up the entire house. Bernier's life wasn't in danger, but he probably wouldn't be waking up before this whole situation was over. Roland's stats were much higher than Agni's, so catching up to the puppy wasn't hard. He saw him sniffing around and running along the usual path that they took to get to his house. There were signs of Bernier moving through here, marks of dried blood, and even where he was dragging his leg. This path leads to. They came to the fork in the road that was between his house, the dungeon, and the city. With more sniffing, Agni shot towards one of these paths that made Roland frown. He was going towards Albrook, which he had hoped to avoid. This was not a main road path, but one that he and Bernier used as a shortcut. It went through the woods and was also the place of the incident. Soon both of them arrived at a spot with a lot of snapped branches and marks of battle. There were even parts of Bernier's torn-up clothes. While Agni continued to sniff around, Roland examined the crime scene. It was clear that Bernier tried to put up a fight, but there were multiple assailants. They must have followed him from the city and waited till he was alone, probably a tracker in the party. This isn't that far away from the house. Roland felt a bit dejected that he had no idea that such a thing was happening. While he was consumed in his work, Bernier was getting assaulted by someone here. He was already thinking about some sort of communication device that would alert him if something like this happened again. "Did you get the fresh scent, boy?" Agni barked after sniffing around this area. The trail was still fresh but it went towards the city. The people that did this were probably somewhere there, this could pose a problem. He had already decided to at least check things out. If the assailants proved too powerful he would have to let things be. On the other hand, if they weren't, then he would have someone to take out this pent-up rage on. The two continued all the way to the city gates which they passed now after Roland had attained his monster permit. The combination of a large man in a crimson armor and a small red puppy with a ruby tail did turn some heads. Weapons and armor were allowed, so even though he had a shield and sword they weren't taken away. Where is Agni leading me to? They moved past the main street and into the market and continued further. He only visited the Adventurers Guild along with the auction house. They were going further into the more underdeveloped area which some might call the slums. It was a place that people that came here with high hopes ended up when they failed. Bernier told him once that before he started working as a smith with him, he was forced to live around this area. He told him some tales of daylight robberies and thugs getting into fights. Apparently, the guards didn't wander in here too often, which led to the creation of a more lawless zone. This was a part of this world. Places like this existed in all developed cities. With time Roland also expected the Thieves' Guild to be created if the city's population kept increasing. The houses became more shabby and the streets dirtier the further the two went in. Soon they ended up at a larger building with saloon-like doors. Agni started pointing with his nose inside, which made Roland believe that the assailants were in there. In there, Agni? Good, you should go hide somewhere and don't come out till I call for you, understood? Agni whined a bit but soon followed the instructions. With time he had grown into quite the well-behaved pooch. He was smart enough to realize that he would only hold his master back against the people inside. Roland watched as his ruby wolf ducked into one of the alleyways to hide. It would be difficult to concentrate on fighting if his puppy got used as a hostage. The assault happened recently, I should be able to ascertain who it was. He moved forward to open the door to this rundown pub. It was a seedy establishment that housed all sorts of ruffians that didn't want to pay the market price for alcohol. The door parted for him and revealed a somewhat large interior. People were talking and laughing loudly while drinking watered-down beer and wine. His somewhat unique appearance did raise some eyebrows, as not many would be able to afford an eye-catching runic armor like he did. While they were looking at him, he was looking at them. His eyes scanned the area for potential culprits and stopped at one of the tables. There was a group of men sitting there, they looked rough around the edges. They were clearly the ones that he was looking for, as there was a particularly large backpack up against the wall next to their table. All tier 2 high. This should be manageable. Roland turned to them and started walking. It was time to get in some trouble. Chapter 97, Taking Out the Trash. The day in Albrook was slowly coming to an end, but the sun was still out. Chatters and laughs that were previously prevalent in this establishment went silent the moment an unknown person walked in through the saloon-like door. He was larger both in height and stature than the average human male. This wasn't what made this person stick out like a sore thumb. The armor that he was wearing was dark crimson, mana stones and runic symbols adorned it from head to toe. The people in this place belonged to a more rough element of the city. This place was one of the cheap pubs where they could spend their hard-earned coin. A chunk of it procured through less than stellar means. Thieves, rogues, and con artists were all here, and they could tell that this unexpected night was here to cause trouble. It was abnormal that someone with that amount of gear would show his face around here. Most people here were already inching away after the armored man looked to the side and started approaching one of the tables in the back. Hey, isn't that Devon and his chums? Did they do wrong to some high-ranking adventurer? An old-looking dwarf asked while taking a swig from a pitcher filled with alcohol. The person sitting next to him was a human of similar age. The man rubbed his chin, but soon he shrugged. No idea, though Devon and his boys aren't pushovers. This might be interesting. I'll put 2 small silvers on those idiots. You're on. Both of the men grinned at each other while continuing to drink their booze. They were far away from the spot those men were sitting in and wanted to see a good show. It was quite normal for bar fights to break out in a place like this and just as normal to put bets on them. It was something that was welcome amongst the ruffians living here. It was seen as a form of entertainment to spice up the monotonous life. With the lack of modern-day entertainment, what was left was fighting, gambling, sex, and drinking. "Hey Garland, get a load of this guy." Devon, the leader of the group, was in the middle of drinking some cheap booze while glancing at the busted bar wench. He looked to where his buddy Garland was pointing to spot a strange armored man. The man was wearing a full suit of plate mail armor. On his back was a kite shield and to his side an arming sword. Devon was a bit drunk already and he was together with 4 other party members. Even if the man was armored and armed, this didn't pose much of a threat. The people here also had their weapons ready, some strapped to the sides just as the night, while others had them placed on the table directly. In this neighborhood, there was a need for the protection of one's life. Having people fighting with drawn weapons wasn't as rare as some people might think. "You think you're scaring anyone with that fancy armor? Fuck off." The other 4 men laughed while looking at the crimson armored man. This wasn't the first time someone tried starting things with them. It was the first one that someone in a fancy armor like this though. Devon was already thinking about how much he could get for this piece of equipment if this man actually tried something funny. Before the laughing stopped, the man in crimson pointed to something behind them and spoke out. "That doesn't belong to you, return it." Devon's face twitched in anger slightly after hearing the person speak. He had quite the condescending tone and Devon was a person that despised getting ordered around. Before speaking out, he glanced to where this person was pointing. "The backpack? Did that idiot Bernier send you here?" "Bernier? Maybe we were too lenient with him, next time we should break both his legs," Garland said from the side while the other party members started to laugh again. Even though they were laughing, they were all slowly reaching for their weapons. This person was an unknown element that they haven't seen before. The only reason they attacked Bernier was that they were sure that he didn't have anyone backing him. Now this man showed up, which made their previous assumption null. "Give it back." The man took a step forward while not letting up. The 4 members from Devon's party stood up with weapons in their hands to protect themselves. They knew that the one that struck first had the advantage and they wouldn't let this person deliver a blow while they were sitting down. "You're brave, my friend, but also stupid. How about this? I'm a generous man. You can take the backpack for, let's say." Devon had a big smirk on his face while talking slowly. His men were ready to strike and he felt confident that this person wasn't a Tier 3 class holder. The man had a certain skill akin to the analysis skill to sense his opponent's strength. The man in red was clearly someone at Tier 2, but he didn't outlevel his party by that much. If he fought them one-on-one, then he might have stood a chance, but with all of them ready to strike, there was no way of them losing this battle. 10 gold coins does sound reasonable, doesn't it? Everyone that was looking at this play out gulped hard. 10 regular-sized gold coins were quite a big sum. A person could buy a house with that, or even a set of enchanted items. The man in red armor didn't answer this proposal. It seemed like he was examining the situation before making a decision. 10 gold too much for you? How about you leave us that armor of yours along with your shield and sword? Devon grinned some more. He didn't think that the man would go for the trade, but he didn't care. If he attacked them, then they would have the right to strip him of all of his belongings. The city guards didn't come here and no one in this pub would snitch. It was an unspoken rule among the people living here. Everything would be taken care of between them without involving the nobles. "What? Don't have it." The man in red remained silent without answering. Devon's grin started fading as getting ignored was also something that he disliked. The man showed up out of nowhere and wanted to take Bernier's backpack back. Inside of it, they found some change and blacksmithing materials. There wasn't much, but they could pawn the large storage bag at the auction house later. He would certainly not give something like that away for free, even less likely after the armored man showed up. If they gave in to his demands, it would make him and his crew seem weak. A person of crime had an image to uphold. If they didn't, every two-bit crook would try to screw with them. So, you won't return it? Are you an idiot? Devon replied with a glare. The man seemed to ignore his previous proposal. It was as if bartering for the item was out of the question. Then the man did something strange. He moved his hand into a smaller spatial bag. This prompted Devon's men to get ready, but instead of any weapons, he pulled out a round orb. This peculiar orb lit up in blue color and projected an image of some dots. It was clearly a magical device, but the use was unclear. Good empty alleyway, no one there. What are you mumbling about? Devon, this guy is pissing me off, let me. Before Garland could reply, the man in the crimson armor moved both his hands forward. He wasn't holding any weapons, just pointing with the flat side of his palms at them. It looked like he was trying to push an invisible wall. They realized too late what he was up to, as his whole armor lit up like a Christmas tree, with the focus being his hands. What the? A massive ball of green energy formed in front of him before being shot out. It was a massive burst of wind elements that pushed all 5 of the men back against the wall with a staggering amount of force. The shabby wooden walls of this pub weren't able to support this attack and crumbled. All of Devon's party members, including him, were sent through this wooden wall and fell out on the other side. Everyone that was watching this from the side was astonished by this development. The armored man looked like he had some enchanted armor on, but no one had ever seen someone use it like this. Mostly the enchantments would be buffing spells or defensive ones. Active magic spells burn through the caster's mana by too much. Unless someone was a mage, they wouldn't be able to handle prolonged use of such gear. Even then, mages would use special magic wands or staffs for such things, and not bulky armor that slowed them down. The fight continued while people scattered to the sides even more. Now they realized that the fight had some kind of crazy magic involved. There was now the possibility of being involved in some wide area magical blasts. No one was willing to stick too close to a caster that was using runic weapons. You fuck! Devon spat out some blood as he was hurled all the way on the opposite side of this alley and into a stone wall. His party members were all close to him while one of his men was still hanging out of the wooden wall. Wait, look out! With a sudden blurry movement, the man in red armor was now upon the man that was covered in splintered planks. He was grabbed by the neck from behind and promptly lifted up, then the armor started glowing in a blue light before another spell was discharged. Yarghhhh. It was a lightning spell. The man was being electrocuted before their very eyes. It was clearly a higher tier common spell that packed quite a punch and was fast. After the Crimson Man injected their party member with high voltage, he was promptly tossed to the side, his body limp. The fight was taken outside of the premises of this pub. Some of the people that were on the inside decided that this was enough and it was time to run. There were a few that remained in place, interested in this man's capabilities. It seemed that he was able to repeatedly cast spells, which was the forte of runic spells. This came at a large cost that a lot of people knew. The high loss of MP was seen as problematic. Thus it was surprising that this person was continuously producing magical effects. The armor's mana stones were even shining, making people believe that he was constantly burning through his mana. Get him, he can't keep this up for long. Devon knew the downside of using runic weapons. They only needed to prolong this fight and their enemy would run out of steam sooner or later. A flat pillar of rock collided with Garland's belly. He was the group's tank and also larger than this enemy that they were facing. He had managed to grab his shield and axe before being sent out through the wall. The problem was that the attack came from below and not from in front as he had expected. The man's right boot looked to be the magical device that activated this earth-based spell that connected with his liver and sent him to his knees. More screams filled the alleyway as the magical spells continued to be discharged. It didn't seem like the person casting them was having a tough time with his MP. With an ice blast, another man fell, and now the only person that remained was the ringleader. Don't think that you'll get away with this, you shit. You think you can just waltz in here and Before Devon could finish the sentence, a blast of magic energy connected with the ground right next to him. He moved to the side to evade it, but it seemed that this was just a feint that the man in crimson was waiting for. The armor glowed in green light and he appeared right to the side. Without having time to react and in a panicked state, Devon received a clean shot from the man's fist to the chin. His teeth and blood flew up against the stone wall as he crumbled like a deflated balloon. You could have just returned the backpack, but you had to make it difficult. Before Devon could reply, he saw a blood-covered armored fist flying towards his face again. With another hit, he tumbled onto his back and into some garbage on the side. The man that assaulted them walked towards him with slow steps and placed his foot on his chest to hold him down. I don't particularly enjoy stuff like this, but I'll have to make an exception for you. Wait, what are you doin'? Devon's vision was blurry and he had blood in his mouth and no strength to fight back. He saw Roland leaning down and grasping one of his legs below the knee. The mana stones on his armor glowed in red as the man felt pressure being applied to his shin bone. Stop, you bastard, nu. A faint crunching sound could be heard by Roland as the shin bone snapped in half. He felt that the eye for an eye approach was the right choice here. The potions could heal the broken bones as well, so this wasn't even that harsh of punishment in his mind. Before passing out, the last thing that Devon remembered seeing was a discharge of electricity coming from the very gauntlets that broke his leg. It had actually been quite the merciful gesture from Roland, as the man was knocked out cold almost instantly and didn't need to suffer through the pain of a freshly broken shin. Roland removed his foot from the man's chest and glanced at the broken leg for a second before turning around. The battle was won quite easily, but he had used a large amount of mana to hasten this process. He took a mana potion out from his storage bag and drank it before turning around and heading back into the pub. The entrance that he made with his wind blast was still there. On the inside, he could see half of the people missing while some others looking at him with interest or fear in their eyes. While walking, the chipped wood started cracking under his feet. He looked to the side to where the backpack was sitting and moved over to it. This item was mostly undamaged with some chunks of wood here and there. Well, that was easier than I expected. Roland wanted to pat himself on the back as he decimated a party of lower-level Tier 2 warriors. They were all below his level, with the leader being at the 68th one. They were close to each other in that regard. He was wearing his necklace that blocked part of his status, but the leader from this group looked confident in their fighting capabilities. There could have been other ways unknown to Roland to measure the strength of the opponent. Though this might have been just a sense of the level difference without an in-depth look into the stats. He grasped the backpack and carried it with one hand while still having the shield on his back. Everyone that he fought was left alive with mostly minor injuries that could be recovered with the help of potions. Before leaving, he moved over to who looked to be the bartender in this pub. The man was an old muscular man past his 40s. "What do you want?" Even though the man witnessed him take out 5 people with spells, he didn't look that scared. "Here, this should cover the cost for the destroyed walls." Roland reached out and dropped a couple of small gold coins on the bar counter. The old man raised an eyebrow at the large sum of money and then to the large hole in the flimsy wall. "Hey brother, if you want, there ya another wall on the other side." The man grinned while quickly swiping the coins from the bar counter. Roland just turned around without replying and went for the exit. He had gotten what he came for and it was time to leave. There was a small crowd at the regular entrance now, thus he decided to use the one that he made with the wind blast. While stepping through it, he could see most of the assailants still on the ground and out cold. One of them was crawling out through the alleyway to safety. He only broke the party leader's leg while the others were left with bruises and broken teeth. Thus it was normal for one of them to attempt to flee. The person that was crawling away was Garland. Being the tank, he did have the most resistance and hit points from the group. He could see Roland walking out of the hole in the wall again, which prompted him to quickly try to escape. He had already seen Devon's broken leg and was not willing to receive the same treatment. Help, he is crazy." Roland could hear Garland call out to someone from afar. It looked like he was grasping for straws and trying to ask the passers-by for help. He didn't think that anyone would actually help some thug like this guy, but to be sure he drank another potion to recover more of his mana and stamina. Ha, someone done you idiots in? You probably deserved it. While walking forward, Roland heard a familiar voice that made him stop in his tracks. He tried looking at the source of that voice. Doing so made this person spot him as he was walking out of the alley. It's you. What is this guy doing here? What Roland saw was a familiar face of a man he once fought. It was the guild instructor that was unhappy with the results by the name of Armand. He was standing there with two women, each one was clinging to one of his muscular arms and looking in his direction. For some reason Roland didn't like the look in Armand's eyes, it seemed as if the fight wasn't quite over yet. Chapter 98 Round 2. There they were, looking at each other without saying much. Armand looked to have been having quite a blast. Two women were clinging to his arms while pushing their squishy assets into him. They had heavy makeup on and looked to be working ladies that he had picked up somewhere. Each one of them sported a set of animal ears and a bushy tail was wiggling around from above their plush rear ends. The two women also noticed Roland in his flashy red armor and started smiling at him. Please help me, this guy is crazy, he started attacking us for no reason. Garland was down on the ground not far away from where Roland was standing. He was still weakened and somewhat paralyzed. Without being able to fully crawl away, he fell to Roland's swift kick. This kick had enough power to send Garland tumbling to the side. The hit connected with his stomach, which then caused an abrupt release of the man's previous calorie intake. Armand, I'm scared, we should leave. One of the girls said while moving behind the large man. The other lady also flinched as she saw Roland kick one of Bernier's assailants to the side without any mercy. What do you think you are doing? Armand, on the other hand, didn't seem like he wanted to leave just yet. He puffed out his chest while strutting forward. Do I really need to fight this idiot? Is there a way to defuse this situation? Roland looked at the large man moving forward. In contrast to his fight during the guild test, this time around Armand was wearing some higher level gear. He had large black gauntlets made from deep steel. They were of a different design than what a knight would wear, in the sense that there were blades sticking out from the sides. They were at a slight angle and probably used to receive hits from bladed weapons. The sharpness also made Roland believe that they could cut into flesh rather easily. His legs also had fitted boots and the rest was light armor with chest protection. It looked like the man was back from a dungeon run and was just hanging out here right after. He wasn't sure, but the two ladies by his side made this theory probable. While Armand moved forward, the two girls decided to move to the side. It looked like they would be cheering him on. This doesn't concern you. After going through with the fight, Roland wasn't in the mood to explain himself. He already didn't see Armand in a favorable light after he complained in the test about his armor. It doesn't concern me? You think you can attack guild members whenever you like? They stole something from me, my reasons were justified. Armand looked at the large backpack that Roland was holding with one hand. Before asking, he looked to Garland for some confirmation. After the kick and release, the man was now able to talk. He lies, he just attacked us out of the blue. So you are a thief and a liar. Armand smacked his fist into his palm while approaching Roland in a menacing way. It didn't look like he would take his word over the man called Garland. From Roland's perspective, he was probably only trying to look for an excuse for this fight. Shouldn't you investigate before you make an assumption? We can all go to the guild. Roland was still mad, but his common sense prevailed. The whole situation could be resolved without bloodshed if they went to the guild. He had some proof that this backpack belonged to him and not to these men. Bernier would probably recover for an official hearing, and some things like this could be confirmed with spells. Investigate? There is no need. Now stop spouting nonsense, you're just trying to stall. Stall for what? How did an idiot like you become an instructor at the guild? Roland replied with scorn, as he had enough of this guy. It didn't look like there was a way to reason with him in any way, shape or form. Who are you calling an idiot, you idiot? Roland wanted to scratch his head at this response. The man before him was clearly not very intelligent as he continued moving towards him. There was not real beef that Roland had with Armand, but he wouldn't back down if a fight was that he wanted. Surrendering was also not an option. He had no way of knowing what this man would do. Would he actually take him to the guild and go through the proper procedures? It didn't seem like this person was very fond of paperwork, so that option was not probable. Back off, I won't warn you again. Roland moved his hand towards his enemy. His palms were outstretched, similar to the way when he produced the wind blast. He didn't want to hurt this idiot as he was related to the guild. If the other guild members would see him in a bad light, or if he would be excluded from it for attacking an active instructor, was unknown to him. He didn't have any proper backing in this city, and the guild master was probably someone that he wouldn't be able to take down with strength alone. Shaking in your boots already? I'm going to pry you out of that armor. Honey, hurry up, we don't have all day. The two ladies that Armand was with started cheering from the side while he got in a fighting stance. He placed his left foot forward while his right foot was back and pointed at a 90-degree angle. He had one fist to the right side of his hip while the left one was stretching out. Roland wasn't an expert, but this stance made him think about karate. It looked like the diplomatic talks had broken down and now the battle remained. He looked around for a moment, and from the corner of his eye, he spotted Agni peeking out from another alleyway. His wolf was waiting for an order, as for the time being he was still on standby. The enemy this time around was quite dangerous. Agni would have to sit this one out, as his master didn't intend to utilize his help during this fight. His hand was also outstretched and he would use this to his advantage. Armand had only witnessed him fighting during the guild test and he wasn't aware of this armor's full capabilities. Roland had no reason to hide this anymore, as he had already used a plethora of runic spells against the band of thug-like adventurers. The space they were occupying was spread out. They were standing on a plot of land that was surrounded by buildings from each side. The people from those buildings were looking at the two men that were going to fight. Some of them were whistling while others were cheering. Everyone here wanted to see a good show. Fights between drunks weren't anything new, but this looked to be one between two higher-level adventurers. There were even people betting already, mostly in Armand's favor as he had gotten popular in this city. They couldn't ignore Roland's fashion choice either. The armor made them think that he was an established adventurer or knight. Not gonna use that fancy sword of yours? Armand asked while Roland didn't reply. He just stood there with his hand outstretched towards his opponent. He snorted at Roland that didn't reply and just charged toward him with increased speed. Roland was a bit surprised at the charge, as it was much faster than what he remembered the man being able to output during the guild test. He was now also wearing enchanted clothes, so that could have been the issue here. Armand continued his charge as he tried to close the distance in an instant. He knew that there was something off with that hand, so he was wary of it. This was something that Roland was counting on. The hand was used as a feint to mask his true purpose, which was the earth pillar spell that he used before. Without even stepping forward, his metallic boot started glowing. The moment Armand got close, a large spire of hard rock erupted from the ground towards him. This clearly took the tanned man by surprise, but it was only good to stop his charge while not causing much damage. Roland expected a clean hit on the stomach, or at least to make his opponent stagger a bit so that he could release another spell. Instead, the rock pillar got smashed into rubble by Armand's large fist. He recovered quite quickly and continued. This time around Roland had to step back while activating the cone of cold spell. A wide burst of frost energy erupted from his opened palm. The crowd gasped as they saw the quick casting proficiency that Roland was displaying. Normally a person needed a lot more time between spells and even longer for magic armor. Roland could do this thanks to programming the spell language himself. It was tailored to him, and he also possessed a specialized class that was good at using runes. I knew you had more tricks up your sleeve. Armand shouted while dodging to the side. Even though Roland was fast on the uptake with his spell casting, he was fighting a close-range expert. His opponent's reaction time was about the time he needed to activate his runic spell structure. He moved his hand to follow his opponent while spraying the cold air in a wide area. The ground below became covered in ice and the people in the crowd even felt the shift in temperature. Some of them realized that it was probably a bad idea to stand so close to a magic caster like Roland. One stray spell could kill or maim anyone involved. Roland wasn't a madman, he could see people getting affected by his cone of cold while he was trying to hit his target. This place wasn't suited for someone like him for fighting. He couldn't use some of his more powerful spells like a flame blast. If he missed, he would probably hit someone from the crowd that continued to gather. This calls for. After stopping his spell, he jumped back. Armand wasn't far behind as he continued his approach. Roland on the other hand moved his hand to his waist to take out a little ball of paper. He threw it towards Armand that was quick to move out of the way and protect his head. Yet instead of an explosion that he expected, a burst of thick smoke was released by this ball of paper. A tactical retreat. His armor's green mana stones lit up as he started running. He was sure to go for the alleyway where his little puppy was in. Agni was quick to jump into his arms and both of them took off. The backpack was also grabbed from the side as he escaped. What is this? Get back here, you coward! Armand was momentarily stunned by the smokescreen, but after activating one of his skills he spotted some green light. The muscular man took off running after Roland while also leaving his two escorts. He had long forgotten why he had come to this place, not yet taking revenge on Roland was the only thing on his mind. A little chase commenced as Roland's more speedy form was hard to catch. Armand wasn't slow either and was able to somehow keep up with his pace. The people were left with an empty field with no fighters present as they had run off to God knows where. The two working girls started stomping their feet in rage after their date had run off without even tipping them once. Stop, coward, you can't run from me. Who's running? The two fighters came out at a deserted spot in the city. The only thing here were old buildings and rats. Roland's main goal was to get away from the populated area. If he didn't manage to find such a spot, he would just continue with his escape, but now that wasn't needed. He threw the backpack to the side while getting ready. Go hide behind those rocks, Agni. Woof. The puppy replied while running behind some rubble. His master on the other hand turned around to look at a very pissed off Armand. He was in his enlarged form that made him look like a very muscular tomato. This was the same skill that he had used before. With it Roland knew that his opponent was more formidable. A red glow covered his vambraces from both sides, but it was focused on metallic parts that were sticking out. This was the weapon he had worked on before and now would be the time to test it. The red glow expanded from Roland's wrist and fire elemental energy slowly shot out. This energy slithered forward like a molten snake and singed the ground. It looked like two whips made from molten lava were attached to Roland's hands. He was even able to grasp them while flailing them around. Armand charged forward, but he was stopped in his tracks by one of those fire whips colliding with the ground right in front of his foot. The snake-like torrent of fire energy expanded in length and started to dance. The guild instructor found himself on the defense, evading what he could while blocking the magic with his deep steel gauntlets when it wasn't possible. This was a little spell that Roland came up with recently. He was actually working on something that could retain the fire elements in place. It would look more like a sword made from plasma, but he was unable to condense it in place without suffering a large loss of mana. This runic flame whip spell was a byproduct of that research. The added random movement was quite hard to dodge, which made this weapon quite deadly. It's powerful, but the mana usage leaves much to be desired. He thought to himself while the whips tried to coil themselves around his opponent. Armand wasn't able to close the distance, but he also wasn't able to deliver a decisive blow besides some minor burns. Armand had successfully managed to defend himself with his own enchanted gear that was looking slightly melted, but it was still keeping its defensive properties. The whips of fiery energy extended in length while wiggling about like two long tentacles. There was an inclusion of a self-guiding spell structure that he added from another spell that he knew. With its help, he only needed to point these whips in the general direction of his enemy and they would try to dismantle it. The approach he was taking was a bit excessive, but his opponent wasn't that easily defeated. Even with this weapon going after him, he was able to bat away most of the attacks while getting some residual damage in the process. Soon both fighters backed away from each other. Roland had used quite a bit of his mana while Armand's skill was also running its toll on him. If this battle continued, the person with more reserves would probably be victorious. Damn coward, using underhanded tricks, fight me like a man. You tell that to every magic user that you start a fight with. Roland scoffed back after hearing Armand speak. He was more of a magic caster than a close-range combatant, even though he did a lot of training. There was no reason for him to duke it out at close range with someone that specialized in it. Keeping him at a distance was exactly what his aim was, and it looked like it would be paying off soon. Running out of steam. Shut up. Armand replied while the red coloring from his body started to fade. His body shrunk down back to normal and he looked to be in pain. It was clear that this was some kind of doping ability that ate away at the user's stamina. The man wasn't that smart in using it, as he activated it during the chase till this point onwards. Isn't this enough? Roland would probably be able to finish off his opponent, but this wasn't really what he was aiming for. He didn't know what sort of backing this person had, so trashing him without mercy could backfire. Thus he moved over to the spot that he dropped the backpack while talking. What are you? Look, I'll make a report to the guild. If you have any grievances with me, we can officially settle it there. Though I fear that if questioned you would just lose your job as an instructor. Agni ran out from the side while barking. The sight of the puppy made Armand take a step back. What do you mean? Aiding thieves and thugs is probably frowned upon, don't you think? Thieves and thugs? The man you helped, they stole from me and hurt my friend. I was just returning the favor. The two chatted for a while. Armand looked to be more receptive to dialogue after gassing himself out. Before this event could end though, some trouble appeared from behind. There you are, I've been looking all over for you. An elven woman appeared out of the alley that they both came from. She was wearing some stylish green armor and had a longbow draped over her back. The moment Armand saw this woman, he started grinning. Great timing, Lobelia. Back me up. During their conversation, he had seemed to recover some of his stamina. Now with a possible party member of a similar level, it didn't look good for Roland. Agni started barking menacingly as he was placed back on the ground. It looked like the fight would continue past this point, and now it was 2 against 1. The woman walked forward and stood next to the grinning Armand. It looked that with her addition he was confident in winning. Before he could charge forward again, the elven woman named Lobelia did something unexpected. She grasped Armand's ear and yanked on it very hard. Stop causing trouble for everyone, you big idiot. Along with the ear pull, Armand received a quick kick to the shin. I apologize for my party member's attitude towards you. She looked to Roland and performed a small bow before yanking an unwilling Armand back towards the alleyway that she came from. Roland was left scratching his head, but it seemed that it was finally over. Let's go home, Agni. Woof. Chapter 99, Getting Emotional. Roland stood alone in the wide open area surrounded by old buildings. Some of them had even caught on fire due to him swinging his fire whips around. Thus he needed to douse them with some water magic. Luckily in his bag, he did have the wand he used for cleaning his house with water pressure. I need to report this to the guild along with that guy. He thought back to what happened today. Following Bernier's beating, he went to the city to disperse some street justice. There he met Armand, who attacked him. His reason was probably the test at the guild. There were a couple of choices here. He could just forget about it, return home with the backpack, and that would be it. With the lack of a police force, fights like this mostly went unattended unless someone reported them. The party of thugs would probably do no such thing, as they were the ones that started this whole predicament. This left him or Bernier as the witnesses that would need to go to the guards to seek justice. Though after he beat up the other party already, they might not even bother in following through. The city guards might even apprehend him for causing damage to the city or performing spells out in the open. Dropping the case with those ruffians was probably the best choice, considering that he did get back his items. That left the guild and Armand, who was trying to defend the perpetrators. This was something that he couldn't just look past anymore. It was clear to him that this person was not thinking straight, just tossing his weight around like he owned the place. Armand's level was past the 90s, which brought him close to the next class change. Past Tier 2, a person could change their classes every 25 levels, just as with the Tier 1 classes. The Tier 2 classes could be leveled up to the 50th level, which most people followed through, as there was a certain bonus and special skills if you maxed out. Some did switch every 25 levels though. For instance, the Tier 3 Elementalist Mage class required 4 classes of Fire, Wind, Earth, Ice Mage to be all leveled up to at least the 25th level. There were other class combinations if a person chose to raise 2 of those Elemental Mages to level 50. Frostfire Mage, for instance, there was also supposedly a stronger true version of the Elemental Mage if they managed to max out on all those Tier 2 classes before the change. It would take a lot longer, but the bonuses a caster would get by maxing out their levels with all the classes allowed for a prestige class. Due to how hard something like this was, almost no one actually went through with it. Woof. Yeah, I'm coming. Roland grasped Bernier's large backpack and carried it over his right shoulder. It was time to return home and sleep this whole thing off. His trip back home was luckily not as eventful as his way into the city. He evaded the pub where he fought the party of Tier 2 adventurers. While moving, he had to look at his armor. He had gone through quite a bit of spells in this fight. Everything seems fine. The armor seems more used out in the dungeon, but the flame whips on the other hand. The experimental part that he used against Armand had dug through the steel prototype that he made. He had made it as a reusable part which he could replace later. The spell was on the stronger side as it pushed the capabilities of Tier 2 spells to their limit. He also discovered the biggest weakness of this type of design: it was hard to replace during combat. It was fine in a one-on-one battle, but not if it continued for a long time. When the second party member arrived, he needed to go back to his sword and shield. The whips would only function if he used his rune mending skill, but this would bring the rank down after activation. It was a skill mostly suited for a worst-case scenario and not in day-to-day combat. Unless I can implement some kind of reloading mechanism, this approach might prove fatal if I rely on it too much. With Agni riding on his shoulder, he left the city. The night had already come. With a little jolt to his helmet, he activated his night vision rune. Thanks to it, he could comfortably walk without needing to carry a torch. This had the boon of people not being able to spot him from afar, as he wasn't giving off any light. When they were close to the house, Agni was placed on the ground. The little guy quickly ran out to the entry gate and started to scratch against it. He then promptly bolted inside after Roland opened it up. Ugh! After closing everything tight, Roland heard Bernier's screams. Concerned with his wounds, he rushed inside the house only to spot Agni sitting on his chest and licking his face. The half-dwarf was trying to shove the puppy off him but was unable to escape from the long tongue and slobber. I see that you are awake. Agni finally jumped off Bernier and ran into the kitchen. From it he brought back the wooden bowl that was made for him. He tossed it on the ground and then started barking. Sure, you've earned your reward. Roland chuckled as he tossed Bernier's backpack to the side. His tracking wolf had done quite the good job. The monster wolf's nose was quite a miraculous thing. With his pet around, he would be able to counter one of his biggest weaknesses. This was of course tracking and spotting hidden enemies. Bernier rubbed his face that was now covered in wolf slobber. The first thing he did was to look around. After being beaten, he was still surprised that he made it back to Roland's house. He then looked at his body. His broken leg was numb from the healing potion, but it was well enough for him to stand on it. Boss, what did you? Oh, yeah. I brought it back from your friends. I was sure to return the favor. They won't be walking straight for a while. You should probably rest for the night. You can sleep on the couch if you are too tired. From the way those thugs were talking about Bernier, it was clear that they knew him. Roland moved to the kitchen while Bernier slowly stood up from the ground. The half-dwarf started at his backpack with intent without saying a word. Roland on the other hand was placing some meat on Agni's bowl. Thanks to his runic refrigerator it was easy to store. He even constructed an oven for cooking and baking that was powered by his runic engine. After returning to the living room he spotted Bernier. The young man was holding the backpack and looking his way. Is something wrong? Do you need another healing potion? Before Roland could ask more questions, Bernier's face started contorting in strange ways. It all started with a single tear that ran down his cheek. The floodgates opened up soon after as Bernier started bawling his eyes out. Snot was not far behind as his incoherent wails filled Roland's room. Wait, what? He started moving his hands around in a random fashion as he clearly didn't expect to get this kind of reaction. Bernier was a young man but he didn't expect him to cry like a child. Even Agni peeked out from the side with a large piece of meat in his mouth. He started running around the crying half-dwarf while mumbling something. Does it hurt that bad? And no, it's not about that, this is the first time someone has done something like this for me. Roland scratched the back of his neck while staring at his assistant crying his heart out. He had heard some stories from Bernier's youth, how his parents died, and how he ended up here with no money, job, or friends. It was respectful that he was able to keep it together for so long while still having a smile on his face. He was also not someone that would blame others for the dark turn his life took. Still, he was a young man that was entering his 20s and alone in this world. Without no one to lean on, life was tough. Not many people were like Roland that was fine with living alone. He was in the minority as people were social creatures, without others around they would find it hard to live. This was quite an awkward situation for a socially inept person like Roland. Without knowing what to do he moved over and placed his hand on Bernier's shoulder. Soon an awkward patting on the shoulder commenced as he tried to cheer his assistant up. His lack of interaction with other people had caused him to not really know what to do in such an occasion. The reaction he got was a sharp gaze from this half-dwarf. It made him flinch and take a step back while Bernier used his hand to wipe away some of that snoot. I'll be sure to work even harder from now on, I'll repay you for this one day, boss. Ah, sure. No, you don't understand, I will be forever grateful. I'll be your trusted follower for the rest of my life. It looked like Bernier was pledging his life to Roland in a sort of vow. The recipient wasn't really looking for anything in particular in return for his act of revenge. He mostly did it to not look weak and to send a message to anyone that would ever try to bully his workers. You're being too melodramatic, think you should go to sleep before you pass out again. Bernier's wounds were closed due to the potions, but that didn't mean that he was fully healed. He had many broken ribs and cut up flesh that needed to be mended. These potions that Roland was using weren't magical elixirs. They mostly kicked the body's regenerative capabilities into overdrive to mend it. The materials required for the healing process had to be taken from the body as well as from the potion. This would leave the healed person weakened depending on the type of wound they had suffered. Of course, with higher quality potions the strain on the body was lessened, and with a high vitality stat, this could also be counteracted. Bernier's had a fire in his eyes, but after crying his heart out and then getting pumped up he started wobbling around. Roland had to support him with one hand onto the nearby couch. Sorry boss, I'll go to my workshop. It's fine, just rest here, for now, you've been through a lot today. Boss. Bernier looked like he was about to cry again after being helped to the couch. Roland on the other hand was trying to avoid this show of affection from the bearded half-dwarf. Luckily Bernier was still quite tired, so after leaving him on the couch for a few minutes he was dead asleep and snoring like a bear. I haven't used that sound-cancelling spell in a while. He placed a blanket over his assistant and went away to get undressed and cleaned. Soon it was morning again and the two men had a conversation with each other. Bernier explained in full detail about what this whole thing was about. So, they were nothing more than small-time gangsters. Roland commented after hearing the explanations. It looked like this group of adventurers used their Tier 2 status to strong-arm weak people into giving them money. They even did it to weaker adventurer parties like the one that Bernier was in before. It seemed like the guild was really not being managed well. On one end there were people like Armand that liked to toss their weight around due to being slightly stronger than the regular adventurers. Then we had even worse elements like the party of thugs that extorted other adventurers for money. This reveal made Roland worried. Something like this could only take place for a couple of reasons. 1. The guild master was either incompetent or didn't care enough to bother with people below a certain tier. It looked like the people being abused were mostly below tier 2 or at the start of this tier. The test that he went through started looking more as a show of force to keep him in line. Luckily he was able to turn the tables on the person performing the trial. Now another problem arose as he wanted to report this blatant abuse of power to the guild master. "Boss, are you really going to bring this up with the guild? I think you have done enough." Bernier was clearly against it. He was probably afraid that Roland could be putting himself in more trouble than he could handle. "Of course, that party that attacked you needs to be banned from the guild." This was what Roland would like to happen, but if a full team of Tier 2 adventurers would be outright banned from the Adventurers Guild was to be seen. It was easy to remove Tier 1 adventurers from the picture as the materials that they brought to the guild were of low quality. On the other hand, people like these were already able to kill monsters below the 10th level in the dungeon, which would bring a lot of coin to the guild in return. "But what if you get in trouble, boss? You don't need to go to this extent for someone like me. It's not all about you, Bernier. Don't want trash loitering around the Adventurers Guild. If we leave people like that be, they will only get worse. They need to be punished." Roland didn't want to be living in a city that just let adventurers like that roam uncontested. They would only grow big heads and become more unhinged the longer something like this continued. Sooner or later a fatality would happen. Bernier could have easily died yesterday if he wasn't treated by Roland. Bleeding out in the middle of nowhere. "We'll go to the guild today, but first I need to check my armor." Bernier looked a bit apprehensive about going to the guild. This was of course a normal reaction and Roland knew it. Who would want to face their old bullies right after being beaten half to death? "What are you waiting for? Hey!" Roland opened up his secret chamber while Bernier was deep in thought. After this experience, he thought that Bernier required some cheering up. What would be better than showing him some of his runic items that he was working on? "Ah yes, coming, boss." He didn't need to tell his half-dwarf assistant again as he sprinted down the stairs into the secret runic lair. Inside were all sorts of runic schematics, diagrams, and designs for Roland's inventions. The biggest one was in the back, which depicted his work in progress on the new and improved runic armor. "After we are done with the guild, I'll need to make you some runic equipment. I'll need to get you something to increase that meager amount of mana you have." Roland couldn't just give Bernier his own mana increasing skill. It required mana sense to be used, something that he didn't have. The only way of increasing mana capacity for people that didn't have that skill was through potions or enchanted items. With a big enough mana stone and high-quality runes he would be able to fashion something like this for his assistant. He would also need to fashion a communication device for him if something like this ever happened again. "Pass me the hammer, Bernier, I need to do some repairs." Boss." Chapter 100, Filling out some paperwork. "Why did you stop me? We could have easily taken him down, he was probably out of mana." "You have never been good at judging others, Armand." An elf with golden hair was walking with a large muscular man. The man's arm guards looked to have been melted by some heat and he was also panting. The heavy breathing was caused by the backlash of a skill that he previously used. "What do you mean by that? If I didn't step in you would have died, you big idiot." The elven woman delivered a swift kick to Armand's shin, but due to him having shin guards on, the one that felt pain was her instead. "How could I lose to someone relying on enchanted items? Just look at yourself. You probably haven't realized it yet." Armand looked at Lobelia, who was part of his adventurers' party. He wasn't sure what she meant by that statement, but soon he found himself leaning up against the alleyway. "See, you're barely standing upright and that armored man wasn't even tired. You know my skills, I could tell. But he was using those magic items constantly." Armand replied while wiping some sweat from his brow. He finally realized that his body was feeling weak. In his anger he forgot to pace himself. He chased after Roland for a long time even while activating his body enhancement skill. Then he was forced to be on the defensive against those fire whip attacks. He thought he would be able to outlast an avid magic item user, as everyone knew that they burn through a person's MP and sometimes even SP. Roland that he was facing on the other hand had truckloads of magic in reserve along with a high speed of mana recovery. This was also paired with his runic mastery skill that lowered the mana requirements on all runic items, and also his class-specific traits lowered it even further. That man must have a special class. His mana was comparable to a mage, and that was even after fighting you for so long. It can't be. We're lucky that he didn't chase you down. Why were you even fighting him in the first place? Well, you see. The two walked down the alley while talking. Armand said how the fight started. So he was assaulting people on the streets and you gracefully, from the bottom of your heart, decided to help them out. Lobelia squinted while looking at Armand's explanation. It was clear that she knew this man long enough to recognize that this was a lie. Before she could continue with the cross-examination, two ladies with animal ears arrived at the scene. How could you leave us behind? You didn't even pay us yet. The two women looked quite annoyed, even more as they spotted Lobelia to Armand's side. As an elf she was quite the looker, thus another misconception occurred. Who is this hussy? Listen here, we saw him first. Haven't seen you around here. Are you a new girl? Which parlor do you belong to? Are you trying to weasel in on our turf? What are you talking about? I'm not part of any parlor. Lobelia looked at Armand that was looking to the side and whistling as if nothing was happening. It looked like he was caught red-handed, but this female party member, and it was clear that she didn't appreciate this fact. So this is where you spend your coin. I'm going to tell Big Sis about this, you just wait. Wait, what? Armand started panicking and moved towards the elven girl that was about to leave. But before he could do that, the two ladies he was previously with blocked his path. Wait right there, lady killer, we aren't through with you, pay up. Yes, pay up. You wouldn't want us to tell the madam about this, now would you? The large man's face changed into one of fear as he backed away. He quickly moved his hand into his coin purse and gave the women the money. The two girls with the animal ears smiled at each other and backed off. You know, we could go to a private place. There is enough coin here for a little bonus session. Armand started sweating even more as he looked at the two ladies winking at him now. He managed to snap out of it to chase after his party member. The two ladies looked at each other and just shrugged. Easy money. The two pocketed their payout that they didn't need to work too hard for and moved back into the city. There were other clients they could service through this day. A day had passed since then, and Roland along with Bernier were moving towards the guild building. The half-dwarf was looking a bit skittish today. This was brought on by his unwillingness to cause trouble for himself and his boss. Roland was adamant about this issue as he feared being seen as weak if he didn't follow through till the end. In this world built on strength and connections, he could only rely on himself. Boss, are you sure about this? I fear that this might just bring more trouble. Bernier stopped in his tracks but then quickly flinched forward as something ferocious started nibbling on his ankle. See, even Agni wants you to go. It's just the Adventurers Guild, they won't do anything drastic. Roland wasn't sure about the outcome of this situation, but he was curious about what the guild would do about such an incident. Would they try to sweep it under the rug like nothing happened, or would they punish everyone included, with him included? He himself didn't feel like he was in the wrong, but he was prepared to pay a fine for wrecking things in the city. Only if the others didn't walk out of this without any repercussions, of course. Soon the two were right next to the guild building. It was quite noticeable by the smell of sweaty adventurers. People noticed the characteristic crimson armor that Roland was wearing, but by this point, they were used to it. Both of the craftsmen entered through the door and arrived in the busy building. As always, people were sticking to the notice board while others were waiting in line. This time around Roland decided to go towards the other receptionist lady that looked like a librarian. The line moved fast enough as most people were just there to get rewards for completed contracts. "Good morning, how can I help you?" The woman did a little bow which after she fixed her glasses afterward. She glanced both at Roland and then her eyes fell on Bernier. The half-dwarf flinched a bit. This office-looking lady had the air of no-nonsense around her. "I would like to file a complaint, could you give me the form?" Roland on the other hand saw this as a big bonus. The woman wouldn't ask any silly questions or beat around the bush. With the helmet on top of his head, he was also immune to anyone staring at him. A complaint about the guild, other adventurers. Both actually, one for an official guild member and another for an adventurer party. During his time here Roland had informed himself about how this establishment worked. The guild loved contracts and paperwork. Every quest would be written down as a contract. The people hiring adventurers could then file a complaint if the adventurers stepped out of line. The guild had people that would then determine if the claims were true or not. Depending on the proceeding, the adventurer could be fined, but that also could happen to the job giver if they lied and didn't keep their side of the promise. Without filing the correct paperwork nothing would happen, but after it was done there was no stopping the bureaucratic machine. The guild workers would need to go through the motions of asking the people in the city and also the people involved in this incident. Most would try to avoid such a hassle and just leave it be. Not Roland though, he wanted to see how this guild would make things right. Depending on the results he would know how to proceed in the future and if he could trust the people here to be just in their reasoning. "Here, fill out these documents. Please list all the involved parties in the correct brackets." The receptionist lady explained everything thoroughly while pointing Roland to a small booth at the side. There he found a quill with some ink. He was very quick to write a small essay on what transpired that day. There was also a spot to include what he wanted as collateral for the scene that played out yesterday. He went with banning both Armand and the whole Tier 2 party of thugs from the guild, revoking their adventurer cards. He knew that this was a bit unrealistic, but when bartering it was best to list the highest price and then slowly go down to where both parties could agree on something. "Here Bernier, you need to sign your name here and here." Bernier moved closer and wrote his name haphazardly while also smearing the ink on the completed form. The half-dwarf's handwriting was an eyebrow raiser for Roland. He made a mental note to give his assistant some writing classes. Increasing his dexterity through scribing type skills could actually work for a crafting class like Bernier. Roland returned to the guild receptionist and handed her the papers. The woman looked through it and for a moment he could tell that her poker face changed. It was a minor switch, but he could spot a slight twitch to the eyes when she was reading through his writing. "You wish to file this complaint against this adventurer party and our instructor?" "Yes, is there a problem?" This woman was mostly known for not asking that many questions, so it was odd that she started questioning him about the incident. He had heard the names of two of the thugs that he faced, so he had listed them down. Armand was well known around here and looked to be treated as some rising star. He was quite young while being close to level 100 already. If not for Roland coming along to clip his wings a bit, he would have probably been still cruising along. Is she somehow connected to that party or that muscle brain? It wasn't really his place to ask about personal things, but it would be a problem if the woman decided to sweep things under the rug for some reason. "No sir, I'll deliver these forms to the proper department." Similar to the police from his own world, there was a section of the guild that was responsible for internal affairs. The people from it would need to get to the bottom of this. "Is this all?" "Yes, this might take some time. You can either wait for further questioning or we will give you an appointment for later." "I'll return later, you can send the notice to my address." "How long will it take to clear this up?" Roland knew that things like this could take a while. Waiting around and twiddling their thumbs around wouldn't help with anything. They could return the next day to see if there was a set date or even wait for a letter to be sent to his house. "We should be able to set up a hearing within the week. The letter will cost extra, Mr. Wayland." As always, bonus features like having a courier deliver a letter cost extra. Even when filing these documents he needed to drop a few small silver coins to get things going. This was fine as payment was seen as confirmation that something was wrong. Most people would not bother going through with things like this just by the fact that it cost money. If he lost the case, he would also need to pay a fine for using up everyone's precious time. See, told you that today will just be some formalities, you can stop sweating. Roland commented at Bernier as the two were walking out from the Adventurers Guild. Sorry, I'm not that good with this kind of stuff. You'll have to get used to it, we'll have to go through the hearing, you'll probably have to look at those idiots that did that to you. Unless the party of thugs admitted everything or skipped town, they would need to meet them once more. It was similar to a court case with two parties accusing each other. He was sure that those guys will try to put the blame on him in one way or another. It didn't look that good after walking into the pub and beating all of them up. Luckily, violent exchanges like that weren't that looked down upon in this world. If he managed to prove to some degree that he had a reason for it, the guild would see it his way. Do I have to? Yes you do, don't worry, I'll be there, and not like they would do anything drastic during the hearing. Both of them left to go home. There were still wind turbines to be built and more cables to be placed. With the influx of enemies, Roland felt like he needed to move along with his defensive measures. For this reason, he was also heading towards the city and auction house. It was the time to pick up the gold that he made as well as see if there was something he could get. There was a certain rumor that there would be golem parts this time around. Roland wanted to get the full item, but a part with the operating system would be enough. He had enough know-how to connect the rest of the runic structures in working order. It would be best if you didn't drink before it though, also don't forget to wash up. Now let's go to the auction house. Alright boss. The pair of craftsmen soon left the Adventurer Guild and wandered deeper into the city. They left a certain glasses-wearing woman staring at a stack of papers. Hey Elydia, you look more angry than usual, was that Mr. Wayland and his new friend? The elven receptionist peeked out of the corner while bringing over some large cups of warm tea. Before the stern-looking receptionist could notice, the elf was already looking through the forms out of the corner of her eye. Oh? Isn't that a complaint form? What would Mr. Wayland complain about? It's not me, is it? Hey, can I look at that? No, Solana, you can't. Elydia replied while hiding the rest of the papers. She glared at her coworker. She knew well that she wouldn't be able to hide any of this, but she still didn't like the nosy loudmouth elf and how she acted. Don't be a cheapskate, let me see. The scene soon changed to Elydia trying to hide the papers by hugging them against her chest and Solana trying to peek without spilling the tea. Hey you two, get back to work. An old man called out from afar, the very same one that explained tamed monsters to Roland. The two receptionist ladies straightened out and soon returned to their regular tasks. Time continued to pass by and it was time to close up the guild. Elydia, like the other workers, were now finally able to return to their homes after a hard day of work. Solana waved her goodbye while escaping into the city to have a good time. Elydia, on the other hand, had other things to take care of. First, she headed towards the market, picking out various food items. After scouring and haggling down the prices, she headed into one of the more regular city districts. She arrived at a large wooden house, but before she could enter, the door swung open. Big Sis is back! Yay! A group of 4 children burst out to give this stern-looking lady a big hug. 2 of the smaller children started clinging to her legs while the older ones helped her out with the groceries. Soon she was inside and cooking. The home was large, but there were many young children running inside. There was a clear lack of adults here, it looked as if she was the oldest. While the food was being made, the kids started shouting again as another person arrived. It's big brother and sister, they are back too. Another pair of young adults arrived and waltzed through the door. These 2 looked more rough around the edges and were wearing adventurer gear. Did you hear how much that stupid blacksmith wanted for the repair? It's your fault for damaging them in the first place. Elydia stepped out from the kitchen to see a rather muscular young man carrying 2 kids on his shoulders. Next to him was a cute elf that was actually only a half-elf. I told you to take off your boots before you come in, you're bringing dirt in. Wash your hands, the food will be ready soon. Sure, big sis Elydia. The elf replied, but quieted down after noticing that her big sis was looking at the man next to her with scorn. Armand, we need to have a talk. Elydia soon ducked back into the kitchen while leaving Armand and Lobelia to think about what she meant by that. Hey, you swore that you wouldn't tell her anything, I even gave you a big silver coin. I didn't. Maybe she found it out some other way. The large building soon filled with loud young voices while the sun began to set.